From an early age, we're taught what love is, that it should be eternal, that it completes the other person, that it's the answer to emptiness. We're shown fairy tales, movies, promises, but almost no one teaches us to think about what love really is. Most people live love like following a script, memorized, repeated, imposed. They love the way they were told to love, suffer the way they were taught it's normal to suffer. And when everything falls apart, it's always our fault, as if we've failed at something that was never really explained to us. But what if the problem isn't you? What if the problem is the distorted idea of love that you were taught to believe? Great philosophers and thinkers understood this long ago. Plato, Nietzsche, Simone de Beauvoir, Sartre, Fromm, Jung. They all saw love not as a fantasy, but as a battleground between desire and freedom, between the ego and the other, between illusion and awakening. They show us that love is more than just feeling. It's understanding, it's choosing, it's confronting the truest and hardest parts of ourselves. In this video, I've gathered 30 essential philosophical insights about love, ideas that can change the way you relate not just to others, but to yourself. Ideas that don't promise happy endings, but can offer something much more valuable: awareness. If you're tired of living loves that diminish you, trap you, and repeat themselves, if you feel that love can be more than attachment, neediness, or illusion, this video is for you. Maybe there isn't one single definition of love, but philosophy can help you find your own way of loving, freer, deeper, and more true. When Nietzsche says that to love is to affirm life, even in its pain, he is offering us a lesson that goes against much of what we hear today about love. Unlike the romantic or idealized view, Nietzsche shows us that authentic love is not comfortable. It's not always kind, but it is deeply vital. Loving is an act of courage in the face of the chaos of existence. It's an affirmative act, saying yes to life, even when it comes under the veil of suffering. Nietzsche saw life as essentially tragic, not because it is miserable, but because it is intense, unstable, impermanent, and it is precisely in this setting that love emerges as a creative force, not despite the pain, but through it. Nietzsche doesn't separate love and pain. He understands that every deep affection carries with it the possibility of suffering. To love is to get involved, to expose yourself, to take risks. It means allowing the other to affect us in an irreversible way. This means that pain is not a flaw of love. It is a natural consequence of its depth. But here is Nietzsche's key idea. Worthy love, elevated love, does not shy away from pain. It faces it. It transforms it. It uses it as raw material to grow, create, and renew. This is the noble love Nietzsche speaks of. The love that participates in existence as it is, not as we would like it to be. We live in times when love is often confused with immediate well-being. The logic of pleasure, lightness, and instant satisfaction has turned love into a disposable product. When love begins to hurt, many think it's a sign that something is wrong. But Nietzsche invites us to think the opposite. Perhaps it is exactly there that love starts to become real. Because to love someone, truly, involves facing what we don't understand, what frustrates us, what challenges our idealized image of ourselves and the other. It involves living with difference, with limits, with conflict. And all of this hurts. But this pain should not be avoided. It is part of the process of becoming whole with the other and with ourselves. Nietzsche was a philosopher of intensity. For him, life should be lived in its fullest power, without anesthetics, without fragile illusions. And this applies to love too. To love is to commit to life, not only when it's sweet, but also when it's bitter. It's carrying the weight of the world without bending. It's choosing to continue with the other, with the relationship, with yourself, even when it would be easier to run away. This kind of love demands maturity. but not in a cold or cynical sense. On the contrary, it requires a passionate maturity, a type of inner strength that allows us to feel everything, both joy and pain, without hiding. Nietzsche never idealized suffering, but neither did he fear it. He knew that pain is inevitable and that fleeing from it impoverishes our human experience. By saying that love is affirming life even in its pain, Nietzsche is pointing to a deep choice, the choice to live with integrity. Because love is not a comfort zone, it's a field of transformation. And transformation hurts, change hurts, facing the truth about ourselves and the other hurts. But it is a fertile pain that invites us to grow, to create new meanings, to break with superficiality. This Nietzschean view of love challenges us to step out of the fantasy zone. It's not about romanticizing pain, but recognizing it as a legitimate element of emotional life. Instead of seeking a relationship that never hurts, perhaps we should look for a love that makes us more capable of living fully, even when it hurts. That helps us keep our soul open, even when it would be easier to close off. And here's a crucial distinction. Nietzsche does not speak of love as dependency, nor as submission. The love that affirms life is the love that strengthens us, even when it exposes us. It does not diminish us. It challenges us to be more conscious, more courageous, more whole. Because loving, in this sense, is not losing yourself in the other. It's finding yourself in confrontation with the other. It's accepting that pain is part of the journey, but that this journey is worth walking. That there is no flourishing without storms. That there is no intensity without shaking. That there is no real love without the real risk of getting hurt. Nietzsche knew this, and that's why he said that noble love does not shy away from pain. It looks it in the eye, it understands it, and moves on, not out of masochism, but out of integrity. Because those who truly love are not seeking safety. They are seeking life in abundance. Life fully lived is not just made of light moments. It's made of everything: passion and loss, wonder and frustration. And loving is diving into this, not as a victim, but as someone who consciously chooses to affirm existence as it is. So, what Nietzsche proposes to us is more than a philosophy of love. It's a philosophy of courage. To love with this depth is an act of strength, not weakness. It's proof that we are alive, that we still believe it's worth betting on the other, even with all the risks involved. And if love sometimes hurts, so be it. Because, as Nietzsche reminds us, it's exactly in this confrontation with pain that love reveals its greatness, not as an escape, but as an affirmation of life in its most intense and true form. For Plato, true love is a ladder that leads from sensory attraction to the contemplation of the good and beauty itself. Plato invites us to love as if it were eternal, and this is not just a beautiful or inspiring phrase. It's a deep call to transform the way we experience love. For him, true love is not just a passing feeling or an intense emotion. It's a journey of the soul, a philosophical path that begins with the senses and culminates in the divine. To understand what Plato means by this, we need to dive into his most famous view on love, as described in the Symposium, particularly in the speech by Diotima. There, he presents love as a ladder, yes, a spiritual ladder, called the ladder of Diotima, or the Platonic ladder of love. This metaphor is crucial because it shows that loving, for Plato, is much more than desiring someone. It's about elevating oneself step by step toward that which is eternal, perfect, and unchanging, the good, the beautiful, the true. It all starts with physical attraction. The first step on the ladder is the charm of a person's body. This phase is legitimate. Plato does not dismiss sensory beauty, but he warns, if you stop there, you'll be stuck in appearance, in what is transient, what ages, what changes. True love begins when you move past this first layer and realize that the beauty of the body is just a reflection of something greater. On the second step, you begin to notice that beauty is not just in one body, but in all bodies that share a common form of harmony, proportion, and vitality. Here, love is no longer focused on an individual. It starts to universalize. You begin to see that there is something shared between all the beauties that touch your soul, but the ladder doesn't stop there. On the third stage, love turns to the beauty of the soul. You are enchanted by character, virtue, and intelligence. This is when love deepens, becomes more spiritual. You start to appreciate who the other truly is, not just how they appear. Here, love gains density, purpose, and truth. Then comes the beauty of laws, institutions, and ideas. To love now is to love the order of the world, the principles that make life possible and good. It's loving justice, wisdom, and social harmony. And this, ultimately, leads to the highest point, the contemplation of beauty itself, an eternal and unchanging reality, not found in any object, any face, or any image, but existing in the world of ideas, the intelligible world of Plato. Reaching this point means loving with the eyes of the soul, no longer with the eyes of the body. 2. Love as if it were eternal, therefore, is to seek that which is eternal in the very act of loving. It's allowing love to transform us, to elevate us, to take us beyond selfishness and fixation on the immediate. This journey, as we can see, is demanding. It assumes that love is not just pleasure, it is also learning. To love, for Plato, is a way of educating the soul, and all deep education involves effort, patience, and the desire to transcend. Love is not an end in itself, but a drive, a longing for something we don't yet fully have, but we feel. Plato understood love as a means by which we remember what the soul knew before it was born. Through love, we awaken the memory of the world, of ideas, what he calls anamnesis. That's why true love is also a form of wisdom. It's no coincidence that philosophia means love of wisdom. And here lies a silent critique of love that settles for the surface. Love that focuses only on possession, pleasure, or idealizing the other. Love that doesn't grow, that doesn't teach, that doesn't reveal anything new. Plato shows us that to truly love is to climb the ladder. And if we stay stuck on the first step, we lose the greater meaning of the loving experience. But this ascent is not solitary. It is done with the other, through the other, and often despite the other. Because to love, as if it were eternal, is to see in the other a spark of the divine, even if imperfect. It's seeing beyond appearance. It's seeing beauty as a window to something that doesn't die. It's understanding that love that starts in a face can end in the infinite. This idea is especially powerful today. In a world so marked by speed, disposability, and superficiality in relationships, Plato invites us to slow down, to contemplate, to remain, to love with depth, seriousness, and truth. It doesn't mean idealizing the other, but transforming the way we relate to beauty. Because deep down, Plato isn't just saying love the other as if it were eternal. He's saying love in such a way that the very act of loving becomes eternal. In other words, that it points to what doesn't age, what doesn't wear out, what remains. And this permanence is not in time, but in value. A love that seeks truth, goodness, beauty. This love is eternal, even if it only lasts for a moment, because it connects to what is highest in humanity. It elevates us. To love as if it were eternal, then, is not to promise forever in the romantic sense. It's giving love a direction, a purpose, a transcendence. It's understanding that love is about growth and making things grow, that love is more than just feeling, it's contemplating. Plato challenges us to love with the eyes of the soul, to turn passion into learning, desire into philosophy, and the encounter with the other into a path to the absolute. True love begins as an unconscious projection, but it matures when we confront the shadow and recognize the other as they truly are. Loving is not just a sweet feeling or a psychological fairy tale. For Carl Gustav Jung, loving is stepping into dangerous territory, the territory of the soul. And there, we will inevitably encounter what he called the shadow, everything we prefer to ignore, hide, or deny, in ourselves and in others. That's why Jung clearly says, loving is facing the shadow. At first, love is often a projection. This means that we don't truly love the other for who they are, but for what we project onto them. Desires, fantasies, unconscious ideals. When we fall in love, we project parts of ourselves, especially those parts that are dormant, onto the other. We see in our partner a sort of enchanted mirror, a promise of completeness. The other seems perfect, almost magical. This stage is natural and even necessary, but it's a fleeting illusion. Jung explains that projection is an automatic, psychological mechanism. It's like transferring unrecognized internal content to the outside world. And this happens in love too. We project, for example, our desire for salvation, care, or meaning onto someone's face. Suddenly, that person becomes the one, my destiny, my everything. But in reality, what we're seeing is a part of ourselves that we haven't yet understood. This projection is intense, engaging, and inevitable, but it's also unstable, because no one can maintain the idealized image we create for long. Gradually, the veil falls. And what emerges is the real, the other as they are, with their flaws, limitations, and conflicts. And of course, our own shadow being activated. This is where love faces its toughest test. When the illusion fades, we have two choices. Either we run away, blaming the other for not being what we idealized, or we stay and begin to truly love. Because real love begins after the projection ends. It begins when we accept to see the other in their complexity, not just as a reflection of what we wanted them to be. Facing the shadow in love means confronting what the other awakens in us and what we don't want to see. Anger, jealousy, insecurity, control, resentment, fear of rejection. It's not easy, it's uncomfortable, but it's exactly there that the potential for the deepest growth lies, because no one reveals our shadow more accurately than the person we love. Jung didn't see this as a flaw in love, but as its strength. For him, true relationships are those that transform into a process of individuation, that is, a path of self-knowledge. Meeting the other is, at the same time, a meeting with our unconscious, and the shadow that emerges is not an obstacle to love. It's its invitation to maturity. Often, when something goes wrong in a relationship, our tendency is to point the finger. We say the other has disappointed us, that they've changed, that they are no longer the same person. But we rarely stop to ask, what does this reveal about me? What part of my shadow is being activated? Jung invites us to ask this question, because love is a mirror, and it reveals both the light and the darkness. Facing the shadow doesn't mean accepting everything passively or romanticizing conflict. It means having the courage to look inward, to recognize that the other awakens in us what was already there, but had been dormant. This requires humility. It also requires responsibility. It's not the other who makes us feel this or that. It's our unconscious that's at work, and love brings it to the surface. This profound view of love breaks with the ideal of the other half, the perfect union, the romantic completeness. For Jung, true love is not fusion, it's encounter. An encounter between two whole beings who recognize each other in both their light and their darkness. They don't deny their wounds, but they don't expect the other to heal them either. They face them together, side by side, with awareness and affection. When this happens, love stops being a field of idealization and becomes a field of transformation. It becomes a force that not only unites us with the other, but also forces us to grow, to know ourselves, to integrate parts of ourselves that were hidden. This integration is the heart of the Jungian journey. There is no psychological maturity without confronting the shadow, and love is perhaps the most fertile and most demanding environment for this process. Because in love, we drop our defenses, we become vulnerable, we open space, and in that space, everything that was hidden comes to light. Jung believed that every deep relationship is an opportunity for healing, but not a passive healing, not a salvation brought by the other. It's a healing that comes from confrontation, from awareness, from internal work. Love is letting the other reveal ourselves to us, even when it shakes us. And here lies the great paradox. The more we love, the more we are called to take responsibility for our own shadow. Love requires surrender, but also clarity. It asks for empathy, but also for boundaries. And we only achieve this when we have the courage to see the other as they truly are, and ourselves as we truly are. Jung doesn't promise that this path is easy, but he guarantees that it is real. To love is not to lose oneself in the other. On the contrary, it's to find oneself in the mirror the other offers. And this mirror sometimes reflects what we'd rather not see. That's why, when Jung says, to love is to face the shadow, he's telling us, don't run away from discomfort. Don't abandon love when it starts to show you who you are, because it's exactly there that it can transform you. If you accept this challenge, if you have the courage to walk through the dark side of love with awareness, something deep happens. Love stops being just an emotion and becomes a revelation. You get closer not only to the other, but also to yourself. And this is perhaps the most authentic and human way to love. In virtuous love, we do not seek pleasure or utility, but the flourishing of the other. For Aristotle, to truly love is to wish for the other to flourish, not because it benefits us, not because it brings us pleasure, but simply because the good of the other becomes in some way our own good. Loving, in this sense, is an act of deep ethical maturity. Unlike modern conceptions, which often see love as a territory of desire, emotion, or need, Aristotle invites us to think of love as virtue. And virtue, for him, is always a middle ground between excesses, something that requires practice, rationality, and character. It is not a blind impulse or an uncontrollable passion, but a conscious, ethical choice. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle distinguishes 3 types of friendship, which can also be understood as 3 forms of love. The first is friendship, based on utility, where we connect with others for personal gain. They help us, give us something, serve us in some way. The second is friendship based on pleasure, focused on enjoyable company, fun, and attraction. These 2 are legitimate but temporary. They last as long as the pleasure or utility does. But there is a third form, virtuous friendship, and this is where true love lies. The one that, according to Aristotle, is the highest and rarest. In this type of relationship, what unites us with the other is not what they can give us, but what they are. We love the person for their moral qualities, for their character, for their commitment to the good. And more than that, we want them to realize their potential, to flourish, regardless of what this brings back to us. This changes everything, because in virtuous love, we stop using the other as a means and begin to see them as an end. We no longer love to feel better, but to help the other be whole in themselves. It is a love that transcends ego disguised as affection. It becomes a mutual commitment to human excellence. But pay attention. Aristotle is not talking about blind sacrifice or total self-denial. He does not propose a love that erases the self. On the contrary, he believes that true love is only possible between complete, whole, virtuous people. Only those who are already fully realized as human beings can truly desire the good of the other. And that's why he says, to love is to desire the good of the other for its own sake. This means that virtuous love is altruistic, but not servile. It arises from admiration, recognition, and affinity between 2 beings who share values, ethics, and a similar way of seeing the world. And in this communion, each one not only desires their own happiness, but also wishes to see the other achieve their best version. This kind of love is rare because it takes time, companionship, and effort. It is not built in moments of euphoria or intense passion. It matures slowly, like a plant that requires constant care. And above all, it demands that each person devote themselves to their own virtue, because according to Aristotle, no one can offer to another what they have not yet built in themselves. And this is where philosophy meets daily life. Instead of asking, "What am I gaining from this relationship?" Aristotle teaches us to ask, "What am I offering?" Instead of measuring love by the intensity of emotion, he invites us to measure it by the constancy of character, by the nobility of intention. This love doesn't dissolve in the face of difficulties. It does not abandon when pleasure disappears, nor fade away when circumstances change, because it is rooted in something firmer, the desire to see the other grow, to see them flourish, even if that flourishing happens far from us. And this is, perhaps, the greatest sign of true love, wanting the good of the other, even when that good doesn't directly include us. It is a love that respects freedom, that doesn't possess, doesn't manipulate, doesn't demand. Because someone who desires the good of the other for their own sake also desires their autonomy, their path, their truth. And this, at the core, is the most beautiful form of loving, freedom, loving without possessing. But Aristotle also acknowledges that this is demanding. Not everyone is ready for this kind of love, because we live in a world where many relationships are still based on need, control, or expectation, and where love is often confused with dependence. Therefore, to love as Aristotle proposes, one must also work on oneself to become someone worthy of being loved and capable of loving. This involves developing virtues like courage, generosity, justice, and patience. Not to be perfect, but to be real. To be whole enough to love without needing to dominate, manipulate, or consume the other. This is the Aristotelian revolution of love. It stops being a field of need and becomes a field for cultivating virtue, a partnership between two beings who admire, support, and challenge each other, who wish each other well, and become better because of it. Deep down, Aristotle reminds us that the most beautiful love is the one that builds, that elevates, that makes things blossom. Not the one that binds, but the one that frees. Not the one that demands, but the one that offers. A love that is not a slave to pleasure, nor hostage to utility, but that finds in the good of the other a reflection of its own good. To love, then, is also an exercise in justice, recognizing in the other a value of their own, a dignity that does not depend on what they give us. It's loving with the eyes of ethics, not just with the impulses of desire. And this, in the end, is what humanizes us. Love is choosing the good of the other freely, more than an emotional impulse. We live in a time when love is often associated with uncontrollable passion, instant chemistry, and a feeling that happens to us without warning. But Saint Augustine, one of the most influential thinkers in Christian philosophy and Western tradition, invites us to a completely different, and perhaps more transformative, reflection. True love is a decision. It's an act of will. For Augustine, love is not simply about feeling, it's about choosing, and choosing not just anything, but the good of the other, freely, consciously, and consistently. This view demands much more from us than simply being carried away by emotions. It requires moral maturity. It demands inner responsibility. And, above all, it requires freedom. When Augustine talks about love, he's not talking about fleeting passion, but about caritas, a love rooted in the good, guided by will, and sustained by an ethical commitment. He understands that feelings are volatile. They come and go. But true love stays. And it stays because it's sustained by the will to love, even when emotions fluctuate. This idea might seem strange in today's world, where we are taught to follow the heart, to prioritize the fire of passion, and to abandon everything when the flame dies down. However, Augustine invites us to take it a step further. He proposes a love that is firm, stable, and spiritual, because it comes from inner freedom, not just from emotional reaction. For him, love is an act of the rational soul, which chooses to want the good of the other, and does so regardless of what we feel in that moment. Of course, feelings are not dismissed, but they are not the foundation. They are the ground where we'll can act wisely. Love, then, is about reordering affections, putting the good at the center, and not just desire. This idea is central to Augustine's philosophy. In his Confessions, he describes his own journey, from a young man dominated by passions and desires to someone who understands that true love must be ordered toward the greater good. He realizes that many people love disorderly. They love the pleasures more than the person, the possession more than the good of the other. And this, according to him, is not love, it's attachment. To truly love, for Augustine, is to want the other's good in God, meaning to desire that the other walk towards their own fullness, their truth, their highest good. And this can only happen when we step outside of ourselves, when we stop loving out of need, insecurity, or vanity, and begin to love because we want to see the other flourish, even if it costs us something. It's a love that requires effort, but not because it's burdensome, but because it involves real freedom. And freedom, for Augustine, is not doing whatever we want in the moment, but choosing the good with awareness and perseverance. That's why he says, love and do what you will. Because if the love is true, that is, if it's an act of will aimed at the good, then any act stemming from it will be ethical. This love is deeply human, but also deeply spiritual. It's not at the mercy of circumstances, moods, or phases of life. It survives routines, conflicts, and disappointments, precisely because it doesn't depend on them to exist. It exists because someone chooses to love, even when it's difficult. Think about what this means in real life. How many times in a relationship are we tempted to retreat when feelings cool down? How many times do we confuse the end of enchantment with the end of love? For Augustine, true love reveals itself precisely in the constancy of will, in the daily act of choosing the good of the other, of forgiving, of understanding, of staying, not out of obligation, but by decision. This is a demanding, but also liberating vision. It takes love out of the realm of dependency and places it in the hands of consciousness. This means that we're not at the mercy of emotional tides. We can love even when we don't feel like loving. We can love even amid doubt, fatigue, frustration, because here, love is an active verb. It's a continuous choice. Augustine knew that the human will is fragile. He himself struggled for years with desires and internal contradictions. But he also believed that the will can be educated. It can be enlightened by reason, strengthened by virtue, and guided by a higher purpose. And love is the ground where this will can flourish. That's why loving is not being dominated by forces we can't control. It's, on the contrary, taking the helm of one's own soul. It's looking at the other, with all their flaws, and still saying, I choose your good. Not for our benefit, not out of interest, but because love, when it's true, rejoices in the good of the other. This is an idea that strongly resonates in our current relationships. When we turn love into something based only on personal satisfaction, we're bound to frustration. But when we understand that love is acting for the good of the other, even without immediate rewards, we discover a type of love that frees, that matures, that becomes a source of life, not need. So, love is not a feeling that appears or disappears. It's an act, a posture toward the other. And the more we cultivate this love will, the freer we become, because we stop depending on what the other gives us and start living love as an expression of what we're capable of offering. This is St. Augustine's great lesson. Love is wanting the good. And wanting the good is, above all, wanting the good, the good. The ethics of love requires respect for the dignity of the other. never as an instrument of our own desires. For Immanuel Kant, love is not just about feeling or affinity. Above all, it is a matter of ethics, and this ethics begins with a powerful, and at the same time, deeply demanding idea. Love is seeing the other as an end in itself, never as a means to my own ends. This phrase, which at first may seem abstract, carries a lesson that can radically transform the way we relate. In a world where relationships are often based on interest, emotional manipulation, or convenience, Kant offers us a vision that requires absolute respect for the dignity of the other. For Kant, every person has a value that cannot be measured or exchanged, an unconditional value. He calls this dignity. This means that every human being has intrinsic value, which does not depend on what they do, what they offer, or how they make us feel. This value is rooted in the simple fact that a person is a rational and free being, capable of making moral choices. And that's exactly why using someone as a means, that is, as an object, a resource, a tool to satisfy our desires, is a profound violation of ethics. When we truly love, we do not seek the other as an instrument for our pleasure, success, or emotional fulfillment. Instead, we recognize them as an end, someone who has their own desires, their own freedom, their own history. This is the essence of Kant's ethical view of love. And it's not easy to live out, because many times we love expecting something in return. We love to be loved. We give ourselves to be recognized, and without realizing it, we begin to treat the other as a kind of mirror, an emotional provider, someone whose function is to satisfy or validate us. Kant warns us against this trap. He proposes that true love is the one that respects the autonomy of the other, that does not try to possess, mold, or control them. Love is, therefore, recognizing the other as a subject, not as an object. And that changes everything, because it means accepting that the other is not here to complete me, nor to serve me. They exist for themselves, with their own will, their own choices, and I must respect that. Even when it doesn't please me, even when it frustrates my expectations. This kind of love is, above all, an exercise in humility, because it requires me to stand before the other not as a master, but as a companion, and to understand that the true encounter between two people can only happen when both recognize each other as ends in themselves and not as means to one another. Kant calls this the categorical imperative, a moral principle that tells us to act in such a way that we treat humanity, both in ourselves and in others, always as an end and never merely as a means. This applies to all relationships, and especially to love. Loving based on this principle means letting go of manipulation, selfishness, and domination. It means building a relationship based on mutual freedom, responsibility, and respect. And this is much deeper than simply liking someone. It is a commitment to the moral value of the other. But beware, this does not mean a cold, distant, emotionless love. On the contrary, for Kant, ethical love is not contrary to feeling. It is superior to feeling because it endures when feeling fails. It is sustained by practical reason, by a rational commitment to the good of the other as a free subject. This means that even when emotions fluctuate, as they always do, love can remain, as long as it is based on the decision to respect the other. Love, then, is also a form of justice. It is giving the other what they deserve in their human condition: respect, dignity, freedom. And this forces us to rethink certain forms of possessive, jealous love controlled by fear. Because every love that tries to trap the other in our expectations reduces them to a means, and therefore wounds their dignity. True love, in Kantian terms, does not imprison, but liberates. Because only when the other is free can their love also be free, and therefore true. This view may seem idealistic at first, but in reality, it is deeply realistic. Because it is not based on romantic idealizations, but on a solid moral principle, that no one should be used as an object. not even, and perhaps especially, in the name of love. Kant is firmly telling us the other does not exist to fill our emptiness. They are not responsible for our happiness. They are an autonomous being who deserves to be respected as such. And true love starts right there, in the recognition of the other as equal in value, freedom, and dignity. This also protects us, because by understanding that love must be free and reciprocal, we also free ourselves from abusive or manipulative relationships. We learn that being loved is not being used, and loving is not self-sacrifice. It is being with the other in a just, voluntary, ethical way, without impositions, without blackmail, without illusions. Loving, as Kant proposes, is a challenge. It is moving away from the logic of exchange and entering the logic of respect. It is renouncing the idea that the other is here to satisfy me, and embracing the idea that true love only exists when both recognize and respect each other as moral subjects. This kind of love is mature. It does not live off grand promises, but ethical gestures. It does not seek perfection, but integrity. It does not demand immediate reciprocation, but values the good of the other in their own condition. And in the end, this is what makes this love so deep, not what it feels, but what it chooses to do in relation to the other. If these reflections have expanded your view of love so far, consider subscribing to the channel. Being here is a way to continue seeking wisdom. Eros arises from lack. To love is to desire what we do not yet possess, a drive that moves us. For Plato, love is not, first and foremost, an encounter with what we already have, but with what is missing from us. To love is to desire, and to desire is to recognize an absence. This is one of the deepest and most unsettling truths of Plato's philosophy of love. Love is living in a state of lack. In the Symposium, one of the most beautiful and influential dialogues in Western philosophy, Plato presents the myth of the birth of Eros, the god of love, through the speech of the priestess Diotima. According to her, Eros is not a full, complete, and happy god. On the contrary, Eros is the son of poverty, Penia, and resource, Poros. Therefore, he is an intermediary being, living between lack and abundance, ignorance and wisdom, the human and the divine. And it is precisely because of this that Eros desires, because he does not have what he loves. And what does he love? Beauty, the good, the truth. Eros is, essentially, a drive toward what we do not yet possess, an existential tension that pushes us beyond ourselves. Love, from this perspective, is to experience this tension. It is to feel that we lack something and to move toward it. Love is, therefore, not a sign of fullness, but of incompleteness. And it is exactly why it transforms us, because it pulls us out of inertia, the illusion of satisfaction, the comfort zone, and drives us towards something greater. When we love, we are desiring, and in desiring, we reveal something essential about ourselves. That we are not yet who we want to be, that we have not yet reached what we admire in the other, that we do not fully possess what we envision. This is the erotic condition of the human being, and for Plato it is also the philosophical condition, because, for him, loving and philosophizing are two movements deeply connected. Just like love, philosophy also arises from lack. The philosopher is the one who loves wisdom, but precisely because he does not possess it completely. He desires, seeks, moves. Love is, therefore, an upward force. It pushes us beyond our current limitations toward the ideal. This ideal, for Plato, is beauty itself, the good itself, that which is eternal, perfect, and unchanging. But love does not begin there. It begins in bodies, in visible forms, in gestures and glances. It begins with sensory beauty, but it should not stop there. Because, according to Plato, staying fixated on exterior beauty is to remain in illusion. The true lover is the one who, when perceiving beauty in a body, recognizes in it a reflection of something deeper and more universal. Thus, the lack in love is not merely sexual, emotional, or affective. It is ontological. It pertains to being itself. We love because we feel that something in us is incomplete, unfinished, and we seek in love not only the company of the other, but also the elevation of ourselves. Love is a way of approaching what transcends us. But here is the most delicate point. Lack is not a defect. It is not a flaw to be eliminated, but an existential condition that pushes us toward transcendence. Desire is noble when properly directed. It is the force that pulls us out of selfishness and opens us to the other. It is the engine of growth, self-knowledge, and spiritual elevation. However, this view also warns us of the dangers of misunderstood love. When we do not recognize that love arises from lack, we may fall into two extremes: possessiveness, trying to hold on to the other as if they could fill our definitive emptiness, or emotional nihilism, refusing to love out of fear of the lack it reveals. Plato's proposal is different: to embrace lack as an essential part of love, to accept that to love is indeed to desire what we do not have, and that this is beautiful, legitimate, necessary, because without this desire, without this lack, without this search, life becomes stagnant. Eros, love, is movement, and the opposite of love is not hatred, but inertia. This view transforms how we see the other, because if love is to desire what we lack, then the other is not just someone to be consumed emotionally, but a symbol of something greater that we seek. The other, in Platonic love, is the starting point for a journey that goes beyond the relationship itself. They point us to something higher, more essential, more enduring. But this requires awareness, because lack, when unconscious, becomes a compulsive emptiness. Eros, without wisdom, can become obsession, dependency, illusion. That is why Plato insists that love needs to be educated, guided by reason, oriented by the soul. This is where desire becomes virtuous, when it stops being mere blind lack and transforms into a conscious search for what truly matters. To love, then, is an invitation to humility, a sincere recognition that we are unfinished beings, and that, by loving, we touch this truth with courage, not to escape it, but to live it meaningfully. Because lack does not destroy us, it moves us. And this movement, when lived well, takes us not only to the other, but to ourselves. Because every desire that emerges in love reveals something about who we are, what we value, and what we still need to learn. In this sense, to love is also a process of self-knowledge. The lack is not just for something outside us, it also points to parts of ourselves that have not yet awakened. To love is to desire, and to desire is to admit that there is still a path to walk. Plato, by saying that love is a state of lack, does not intend to discourage us. On the contrary, he wants to remind us that it is precisely this lack that makes us human, restless, creative, passionate about life, and that, if we learn to listen to it attentively, it will lead us to a deeper, truer, more beautiful love. Love truly is to affirm the totality of fate, including the suffering that comes with love. Friedrich Nietzsche offers one of the deepest challenges of human life: not just enduring what happens to us, but loving what happens to us. This principle, which he called amor fati, the love of fate, is, according to him, the ultimate form of strength and freedom. And this includes, perhaps most importantly, what happens to us in love. There is no more vulnerable space than love. To love is to open doors we cannot control, to invite another into what we are, to allow something that does not depend solely on us to deeply affect our existence. And for this very reason, love brings joy, but also pain. It brings connection, but also ruptures, hope, and sometimes disappointment. For Nietzsche, love is not something that comes to save us from reality. It is, on the contrary, one of the most intense ways of living it fully. To truly love, with courage, with surrender, with clarity, is to accept that love carries with it both the promise and the risk, and that this risk is inevitable. When Nietzsche says, "Love what happens to you, even in love," he is inviting us to say yes to the totality of the romantic experience. Not only the happy moments, the romantic declarations, or successful bonds, but also the conflicts, frustrations, breakups, and even losses. This may seem strange. After all, why love the pain? Why affirm what hurts us? Nietzsche is not asking us to be masochistic, nor to seek suffering. He is pointing to a much deeper truth. Pain is part of life, and truly loving life is loving even what hurts in it. It's easy to love what benefits us. The difficult and the grand is loving what challenges us, what transforms us, what forces us to grow. And love, more than any other human experience, has this power. It reveals what is most beautiful in us, but also what is most fragile. It wakes us, shakes us, breaks us, and rebuilds us. And Nietzsche wants us, in the face of all this, not to retreat, not to deny, not to become bitter, but to affirm. To affirm here means to actively accept. It means looking at what has happened to us and saying, yes, this is also part of who I am. If I was rejected, if I was betrayed, if I loved and was not reciprocated, let this not be denied, but embraced. Not because it was good, but because it was real, because it revealed something I needed to know. Amor fati. In love is the courage to look back and not wish that anything had been different, to understand that even what hurt us had a role in our formation, that even what ended left marks that taught us, that shaped us, that deepened us. Nietzsche believes that an individual's strength lies in the ability to make sense of what happens to them, not in a forced way, but creatively, transforming pain into power, loss into freedom, and ending into rebirth. Loving fate is not resignation. It is creating meaning with what we have lived. And this frees us, because when we accept the totality of what love has brought us, even the darkest parts, we stop being victims of history, we become authors of it. When we say yes, even to what hurt us, we regain power over our own experiences. This is a crucial point. Nietzsche proposes love as a life-affirming force, and life is ambiguous, unpredictable, full of contrasts. Love that affirms only the good is still trapped in an illusion. True love, amor fati, is one that includes failure, longing, absence, and mismatches, and yet it remains. Think about your love stories, everything you lived with someone who marked you. Maybe it didn't end as you expected. Maybe it hurt more than you imagined. And still, there was meaning. There was growth. There was a moment when you were more yourself because you allowed yourself to love. Nietzsche does not want you to regret having loved. He wants you to recognize the value of the pain that came with it. Because to truly love is to be willing to accept not just the other, but yourself in the relationship, with everything that involves flaws, fears, poor choices, unspoken words, and still continue. This is the opposite of nihilism, the state where nothing has value, where everything is empty. Nietzsche combats nihilism with this brave statement: love your fate. And in love, this means love your story. Love what it showed you. Love what it took from you. Love until the end and after the end. Not out of longing, but out of integrity. Because to love what happens to you is not to cling to the past. It is to integrate it. It is becoming someone who does not need to erase any page to feel whole. And this, paradoxically, makes us freer to love again, with more truth, more humility, more awareness. Nietzsche knew that love is not control. True love is not a contract with happiness, but a pact with reality. And within reality, there is loss, there is disconnection, there is an end. But there is also beauty in all of this, if we have eyes to see. To love what happens to you, even in love, is to let go of idealism and enter into depth. It is to relinquish the demand that everything be as you dreamed and accept that everything was as it needed to be to make you who you are. This is maturity. This is freedom. This is love that does not depend on the other, but that arises from the inner strength of one who chooses to live fully. And maybe this is the true antidote to suffering in love. Not escape, not forgetting, but affirmation. The courage to say, I lived, I loved, I lost, and still I celebrate what was. The loving encounter, with all its conflicts, is a powerful path of self-knowledge and psychic integration. For Carl Gustav Jung, love is much more than an emotional bond between two people. It is, in fact, a psychic journey, perhaps one of the deepest and most transformative experiences anyone can live through. Because to truly love, according to Jung, is to be confronted with your own soul. When he says that love is a path of individuation, Jung reminds us that love is not just being with the other, but knowing yourself through the other. Individuation, in his theory, is the process by which a person becomes who they truly are. Not just what they show the world, but everything they carry inside, light and shadow, reason and emotion, conscious and unconscious. And in this process, love plays a decisive role, because few experiences touch our unconscious as directly as love does. Love takes us out of our comfort zone, activates our complexes, and confronts us with parts of ourselves we would rather avoid. And that's exactly why Jung sees love not as an escape, but as a fertile ground for expanding consciousness. When we fall in love, for example, we often idealize the other person. We project our deepest, often unconscious desires onto them, the image of the ideal mother or father, the savior, the perfect partner. Jung called this projection of the anima and animus, the archetypes of the feminine and masculine that reside in our unconscious. At the beginning of the relationship, we don't see the other as they truly are, but as we would like them to be. This phase of projection is inevitable, even necessary. But it cannot last forever, because sooner or later, reality imposes itself. The other person shows their flaws, limits, differences, and of course our own shadow is activated, and that's when the true work of love begins. When the projection fades, many believe that love is over, but in truth, this is the moment when love has the chance to mature. Because now we are face to face with reality. We are face to face with the other as they truly are, and with ourselves as we truly are. And this confrontation, if lived well, becomes a powerful mirror. It shows us what we still don't know about ourselves. Jung believed that love conflicts, far from being signs of failure, are doors to self-knowledge. When we argue, when we feel rejected, when we get frustrated with the other person's behavior, we are being touched in inner points that often have nothing to do with the present, but with our entire emotional history. Jealousy, for example, can reveal old insecurities, anger, difficulty in dealing with boundaries, emotional dependence, an abandonment wound, fear of intimacy, an unresolved trauma. Each love situation, therefore, reveals a part of our psyche that still needs to be integrated, and that is the essence of individuation, integrating what was excluded. Love, then, is about coming into contact with what is most human in us, including what hurts. And by doing so, we become more conscious, more whole, more true. But here's the delicate point. This doesn't mean the other is there to heal us. Jung is clear in saying that the other is not responsible for our individuation process. They merely activate it. The loving relationship is a mirror, but the work of looking within, of reflecting and transforming is personal. No one can do that for us. In this sense, love is not a happily ever after, but a deep beginning, It marks the start of a journey that goes beyond living together, beyond romance, beyond the idea of soulmates. Because truly, loving is accepting the other as a distinct being, with their own psyche, their own conflicts, their own journey, and at the same time, using this encounter as a catalyst for our own inner evolution. Jung knew that individuation is not a linear process. It is a winding road full of shadows and revelations. And love, as a profound human process, touches us precisely because of this. It doesn't spare us. It shapes us, not with ready-made formulas, but with the truth of the encounter. And the loving encounter, for him, is also an archetypal encounter. It activates forces beyond individual biography. It makes us touch collective dimensions of the psyche, ancestral patterns, images of the masculine and feminine that influence our behavior, even without us realizing it. In this process, the other stops being just an emotional partner and becomes a symbolic guide, someone who, by deeply affecting us, shows us what needs to be healed, reviewed, and embraced. Someone who, unknowingly, pushes us into ourselves. But all of this only happens if we are willing to see love as a path and not as a reward. When we use the other merely to avoid loneliness, to satisfy expectations, or to fill gaps, we miss the chance to know ourselves. But when we look at the relationship as a living mirror, then love becomes a path of individuation. And this love is not made of pretty words alone. It is made of presence, of listening, of conflict, of reconciliation, of all the things that make us more human, and therefore more whole. Because for Jung, love is not losing yourself in the other, but finding yourself through the other. And perhaps that's the greatest paradox of conscious love. By opening up to the other, we find ourselves. By dealing with alterity, we better understand our identity. By recognizing the other as different and still worthy of love, we learn to love the imperfect, ambiguous, and contradictory parts of ourselves. In the end, loving as a path of individuation is accepting that love does not solve everything, but it reveals everything. It is not escape. It is a mirror. It is not the final destination, but the road. And on this road, if we have the courage to walk with honesty, what awaits us is something more than temporary happiness. It is the truth of who we are, who we are. The conflict between love and freedom is central. We want the other to love us freely, which escapes our control. Few philosophers have dared to delve as deeply into the contradictions of love as Jean-Paul Sartre. In his existentialist view, love is not only about desiring the other, it is, more deeply, about wanting to be desired by them. But this, which seems natural and even romantic at first glance, reveals a conflict at the heart of the human condition. The conflict between freedom and necessity, between wanting to be loved and not being able to control that love. For Sartre, love is not pure enchantment. It is a field of tension. Because to love someone, from an existential perspective, is to desire being the object of the other's gaze, and not just any gaze, but one that chooses me, sees me, desires me freely. And here is the wound. We cannot force that desire. We desire something beyond our reach, for the other, with their intact freedom, to want us. For them, free to leave, to choose to stay. For them, able to love anyone, to choose to love us. This is the romantic dream. And at the same time, the fundamental anguish of Sartre's love, because the other is always a freedom. They are not an object that we can possess. They are not an extension of our will. They are a subject, autonomous, unpredictable, free. And yet, we want this freedom to bend in our direction. We want them to say, "I choose you," not just once, but always. For Sartre, this is the paradox of love. We want to capture the freedom of the other without destroying it. We want the other to desire us of their own will, but we want that desire to be stable, constant, guaranteed. And that's impossible, because the other's desire is theirs. It is never under our control. This tension between the desire to be desired and the freedom of the other creates insecurity, jealousy, attempts at control, and fear of abandonment. We want love, but we want love from someone who is free to not love us. This leaves us vulnerable, and this vulnerability can make us want to trap the other, control, condition, repress. But what happens when we do that? We kill exactly what we desire most: free love. Love that is born from obligation is no longer love. It's convenience, it's duty, it's routine. And that frustrates us, because deep down, we only truly feel loved when we know the other could have left, but chose to stay. This desire to be freely desired is the core of human love, according to Sartre. And it's also the source of great suffering, because there are no guarantees. We'll never know for sure if the other's love will continue tomorrow, if it's genuine or just convenient. And living with this uncertainty is the price of freedom, both ours and the other's. Sartre invites us to face this reality without fantasies. He doesn't offer easy solutions or comforting advice. What he does is reveal that love is a battleground, not necessarily against the other, but against our own impulses of domination and dependence. When we love, we want to be recognized. We want to exist in the other's eyes as someone valuable, unique, irreplaceable. But this recognition only has value if it comes from the other's genuine desire. And for that reason, love is a risk. It's giving up control. It's surrendering to the other's freedom. It's knowing that the other can leave and still choose to stay by your side. And here's a great lesson from existentialism. There is no true love without true freedom. This means love cannot be a prison. It cannot be a contract based on exchanging favors or emotional blackmail. Love, if it's to be true, must allow the other to be themselves. It must endure the fact that the other is free, and therefore can change, can question, can leave. This is not easy, and Sartre never said it would be. He knew that the desire to be desired, when misunderstood, turns into control, and control destroys love. It turns it into possession, into manipulation, into fear. But there's a way out, recognizing the other as a free being and still loving them, accepting that love will never be completely secure, but it can be authentic, that it will never be guaranteed, but it can be deep, that it will never be fixed, but it can be true while it lasts. Loving, then, is a balancing act. It's offering yourself to the other's gaze, knowing they may choose not to see you. It's desiring to be desired without demanding that desire. It's trusting, even without certainty. And perhaps this is the greatest act of loving maturity, to love without imprisoning, to desire the other, and even more, to desire to be desired by them, but without trying to steal their freedom. Because deep down, only the love that is born from freedom is worth living. Sartre challenges us to accept the risk, to live with uncertainty, to abandon the illusions of control, and still dive into love wholeheartedly. Because even in the face of the paradox, the desire to be desired is what moves us. It reveals that we need the other's gaze to feel real, that love is also a mirror, that it is through the other's desire that we often recognize our own worth. But for that desire to be true, it must be free. And for it to be free, we must be willing not to control it. This is the great dilemma of Sartrean love, and perhaps its most intense beauty. If these reflections are expanding your way of seeing love, consider subscribing to the channel. Being here is a way of continuing to seek wisdom. Love is committing to the other without diminishing their freedom or your own. Simone de Beauvoir, one of the great voices of 20th century existentialist philosophy, invites us to radically rethink love. For her, true love is not fusion, submission, or loss of identity. Authentic love, the kind that has existential and ethical value, is built as a meeting of two freedoms: But what does this really mean? It means that love is not about merging with the other, but recognizing the other as an autonomous, free, whole being, just like ourselves. It is not dissolving oneself into the relationship, nor demanding that the other mold to our image. On the contrary, it is maintaining the bond without giving up who we are. It is committing to the other without ceasing to be ourselves. This kind of love is rare because it requires maturity, awareness, and courage. In her work, The Second Sex, Beauvoir examines how love has historically been used as an instrument of oppression, especially against women. Many women were taught to annul themselves for love, to make the other, usually the man, the center of their lives, their reason for being. In contrast, Beauvoir proposes a love that doesn't require submission but partnership, a love where both choose to stay, not just because of emotional need or dependency, but because of free, conscious will. For this, we first need to understand what freedom means in existentialism. Freedom, for Beauvoir and also for Sartre, is the fundamental condition of being human. We are free, not in the sense of being able to do anything, but in the sense of being responsible for our choices. We are the authors of our own path, even when it's difficult, even when it involves the other. True love, then, is one that recognizes and respects this freedom, both mine and the others. But here's the challenge. Because love by nature creates bonds, ties, promises, and freedom, in turn, requires openness, autonomy, space to be. How can we reconcile the two? Beauvoir's answer is clear. Authentic love is the one that, even in commitment, does not demand the renunciation of anyone's freedom. It is a chosen bond, not imposed, renewed day after day, not out of habit or obligation, but out of mutual recognition. This is the beauty and difficulty of this kind of love, because it rejects the false security of possession. It rejects the idea that the other is mine, or that I need to be the other's to deserve love. Love between freedoms is risky, because it lives from continuous choice, not static guarantee. But that is exactly what makes it real. Because love that only exists through dependency is not love. It's attachment. Love that only survives through pressure or fear of loss is not love. It's control. Beauvoir proposes something different, a love that blossoms in the space of mutual freedom, where each can be who they are and still choose to walk together. This requires dialogue. It requires respect. It requires the recognition that the other is not here to complete me, nor to serve me, but to walk alongside me. And if at any moment this path becomes incompatible with one's freedom, true love does not cling at all costs, because it knows that there is no authentic love where there is imprisonment. This view liberates love from many of the burdens it often carries. We no longer have to prove our worth through sacrifice. We don't need to fit into molds to be accepted. We don't have to give up our dreams to be worthy of love. Loving between freedoms means we can grow together, not as halves that complete each other, but as wholes that respect each other. And this mutual growth is perhaps the highest expression of love, because it doesn't suffocate, it expands, it doesn't cancel out, it reveals, it doesn't trap, it accompanies. Of course, this doesn't mean a love free from difficulties. The freedom of the other may frustrate us, may confront us, may destabilize us. But true love doesn't fear those moments. It embraces them as part of the journey, because it knows that love is being with the other in truth, not in illusion. This love requires trust. Trust that the other is there because they want to be. Trust that you are loved for who you are, not the role you fulfill. And this trust is only born when there's room for freedom. Simone de Beauvoir's perspective is especially relevant today. In a world where so many relationships are still based on control, emotional dependency, inherited patterns, and unchallenged norms, she invites us to love in a more conscious, ethical, human way. Loving between freedoms means rejecting love as domination. It means rejecting love as unilateral sacrifice. It means, on the contrary, choosing a love that builds, that expands, that strengthens each person's autonomy. And that is revolutionary, because it challenges everything we've learned about romantic love. It challenges the idea that jealousy is a sign of love. It challenges the idea that we have to suffer to love. It even challenges the idea that love is total renunciation. Simone de Beauvoir tells us, the love that is worth it is the one where both remain free and still choose to stay. This love is not passive, it is active. It is daily construction. It requires constant dialogue, a review of expectations, a willingness to grow. And perhaps that's exactly what makes it so rare, but also so valuable. Loving between freedoms is loving with maturity. It's seeing the other not as possession, but as presence. It's knowing that true connection doesn't depend on fusion, but on conscious choice. In the end, this is Simone de Beauvoir's proposal. A love that does not impose, but offers. A love that does not cancel, but recognizes. A love that does not trap, but accompanies. And that, precisely because of this, becomes real, deep, and transformative. Love requires faith, courage, and commitment in the face of existential uncertainty. For Søren Kierkegaard, love is a leap into the dark, a dive toward the other without guarantees, without maps, without promises of return. But at the same time, it is a leap worth taking because it brings us closer to something essential, the very truth of existence. For Kierkegaard, love is a necessary risk because it doesn't fit into ready-made formulas, it doesn't organize itself into logical structures, and it doesn't offer certainty. Love is opening oneself to the unforeseen, to vulnerability, to the unknown, and still choosing to love. In Kierkegaard's existential philosophy, the authentic life is the one lived with inner passion and commitment to what is uncertain. Nothing truly important can be lived without risk. And this is especially true for love. We live in a world that seeks security. Relationships are often treated like emotional contracts. I give you this, you give me that. We expect guarantees of reciprocity, stability, and predictability. But love, from Kierkegaard's point of view, cannot be reduced to a bargain. It is much more like an act of faith. Loving is trusting the other, not because we have proof, but because we choose to surrender. It's trusting despite the doubt. It's believing that it's worth opening up, even knowing we could be hurt. And for Kierkegaard, this willingness is not weakness, it is courage. Because love reveals how vulnerable we are. It forces us to step outside of ourselves, to put ourselves at risk, to trust without knowing. And this, from an existential perspective, is what makes love real. There is no love without risk, because there is no love without freedom. And where there is freedom, there is uncertainty. The other is free to leave, to change, to not reciprocate, and still we choose to love. This is faith. Not necessarily religious faith, but existential faith, trusting without seeing, jumping without guarantee, surrendering to the experience as it is, uncertain, complex, beautiful. Kierkegaard knew that this risk could be distressing. He himself lived this deeply in his own love life. His relationship with Regine Olsen, which he broke off despite loving her intensely, was marked by this dilemma: how to love truly without betraying oneself, without betraying the other, without fleeing the deepest call of one's own existence. This conflict runs through his work. He shows us that love requires decision. It is not something that simply happens. It is something we take on. And to take on something as uncertain as love requires a kind of courage that the world doesn't always teach. Because loving is not about protecting oneself. Loving is often about disarming oneself. It is about taking down defenses, opening the soul, accepting that the other may touch where it hurts most, and still trusting. And this trust is a leap. It is not guaranteed by logic or promises. It is sustained only by the decision to love. But, Kierkegaard reminds us, the risk of love is not an obstacle to be avoided. It is an essential part of its value. If there were no risk, love would be a habit, a convenience, a contract, but it would not be love. Love has value precisely because it is fragile, precisely because it depends on the other's freedom, precisely because by choosing to love, we know we might lose. And it is this knowing that makes love so precious. Because contrary to what we might think, love does not require certainty. It requires surrender. A surrender that does not eliminate fear, but walks with it. That does not ignore doubt, but stays despite it. This is the true existential leap, choosing to love in a world where nothing is guaranteed. But Kierkegaard also offers us hope, because while love is a risk, it is also a revelation of who we are, of what we seek, of what moves us. By loving, we know ourselves better. We become more human, more whole, more real. Love is a mirror that shows our strengths and our weaknesses. It shows where we trust and where we fear. It shows how much we are willing to give up control and, for Kierkegaard, giving up control is opening space for transcendence, because deep down, love is accepting the mystery of the other. It's accepting that we will never fully know the other, that we will never control them, and that, even so, we can build something together. This kind of love is not superficial. It is not based on compatibility, interests, or emotional security. It is based on a radical choice. I place myself before you and accept the risk of loving you. And what do we gain from this? We gain the chance to truly live, to step out of the bubble of protection and experience the depth of human connection. We gain intensity, presence, authenticity. We gain the right to say, I lived, I exposed myself. I loved, not despite the fear, but through it. For Kierkegaard, this is not a small thing. This is everything, because life without risk is a life asleep. And love without risk is only attachment, illusion, control. But love that accepts the risk and embraces it with faith is the love that transforms us. It humanizes us. It awakens us. It lifts us from the ordinary to the essential. So yes, love is a risk, but it's a necessary risk. Because, as Kierkegaard teaches us, it is in this risk that we discover what it truly means to exist. True love requires surpassing narcissism and the desire for possession. For Friedrich Nietzsche, true love does not come from need, dependence, or the desire to complete oneself through another person. It begins, or more accurately, starts, at the very point where we transcend our selfishness, our craving for possession, and our tendency to make the other a mirror of our own needs. And that's why he clearly states, love begins where selfishness ends. This statement, simple in form, carries a profound lesson. Nietzsche, as a philosopher of the will to power, always valued the affirmation of life, individual autonomy, and the overcoming of illusions. And when he turns to the topic of love, he does so not with naive romanticism, but with the critical intensity of someone who sees love as a field of psychological, social, and ethical forces. Oftentimes, what we call love is actually a refined form of selfishness. We want the other not for who they are, but for what they represent: emotional comfort, validation, companionship, the projection of our idealizations. We love the other as long as they serve us, please us, and reflect a positive image of ourselves. Nietzsche firmly criticizes this kind of love based on possession, control, and narcissism. He considers it weak, small, poisoned by insecurity. A love that, instead of liberating, imprisons. A love that, instead of expanding life, reduces it to the narrow circle of mine, for me, belongs to me. It's easy to love someone when that person is an extension of our will, when they correspond to our desires, our ideals, our plans. What's hard is loving the other in their real alterity. That is, as someone different from us, with their own paths, choices, and values. And this is precisely where selfishness needs to die for love to be born. Nietzsche invites us to view love as a transcendence of the self, not in the sense of negation, but in elevation. True love is seeing the other for who they are, not for what we want them to be. It is wishing the best for the other, not because it benefits us, but because the greatness of the other, their freedom, their expansion, also brings us joy. But this requires inner strength, because selfishness in love is almost always born of weakness, fear of losing, fear of not being enough, fear of not being loved back, and anyone who loves driven by fear loves with distrust, with jealousy, with control. Nietzsche would say, this love is not love yet. It's attachment, need, ego. True love, according to him, requires that we transcend this logic, that we stop expecting the other to fill our emptiness, that we abandon the idea that love is made of guarantees and eternal promises, because life and love within it is fluid, unpredictable, tragic. And that's exactly why true love is so valuable. Because it's rare, because it's difficult, because it requires greatness of soul. Nietzsche believed that a person's duty is to become who they are, and this can only happen when we stop clinging to inferior forms of love based on dependence, possessiveness, and self-deception. True love, then, is a creation. It's an art. It's an active gesture of transcending the ego. And this love begins when we stop asking, what do I gain from this? And start asking, what can I offer without losing myself? For Nietzsche, the love worth having is the one that remains even when it doesn't get everything it expects in return, because it is no longer conditioned on a return. Of course, this doesn't mean staying in abusive relationships or accepting disrespect. Nietzsche would never advocate for submission as a virtue. What he's saying is something else. True love is not exchange, it is affirmation. It is not emotional transaction, it is the creation of meaning. It's the meeting of two forces that do not cancel each other out, but elevate each other. And for this to happen, selfishness needs to be left behind. We need to abandon the idea that the other is supposed to complete us. No one completes anyone. The other is not a lost piece of us. They are a world apart, and only selfless love is capable of recognizing this. Nietzsche challenges us to love with more clarity, to not confuse love with dependence, with easy romance, with obsession. The love that begins where selfishness ends is, in fact, a form of freedom. Freedom to be, and to allow the other to be as well. This love is not possessive. It is generous. It doesn't demand. It offers. It doesn't imprison. It liberates. And for that reason, it is a stronger, more solid, deeper love. But not everyone is prepared for this kind of love. It requires constant inner work. It requires brutal honesty with oneself. It requires giving up the comforting illusion that love is about control, or that love means having the other. For ourselves, it's not. Love is accompanying the other in their freedom and still choosing to be with them. Love is rejoicing in the other's joy, even when it doesn't depend on us. Love is not demanding the other to save us, but walking side by side, like two forces that respect each other. Nietzsche believed that love, when lived in this intensity and truth, is one of the noblest ways to affirm life, because it pulls us out of narcissism. It forces us to grow. It confronts us with what is hardest, and at the same time, most beautiful, in us. The ability to love without asking for anything in return. And perhaps this is the rarest and most necessary love. The love that doesn't seek security, but meaning. That doesn't feed on ego, but on presence. That doesn't want to possess the other, but to witness their existence and say, I see who you are, and even though I can't hold you, I choose to love you. This love begins where selfishness ends, and it is there, exactly there, that true love finally begins to exist. Even in a world without metaphysical guarantees, loving is an act of rebellion and meaning. Imagine waking up every day knowing that, deep down, the world doesn't owe you any explanations. There's no promise of a happy ending, no guarantee of justice, no certainty that everything will make sense in the end. This is the condition of humanity for Albert Camus. We live in a universe that doesn't answer our most fundamental questions, and still, we keep searching for meaning. He calls this the absurd, the clash between our deep desire for meaning and the world's indifference. But Camus doesn't invite us to despair. On the contrary, it's precisely within this emptiness that he finds the most precious space of existence, the space to create, to resist, to love. Loving, in this context, isn't just a feeling, it's a rebellious choice. It's an act that, in itself, confronts the absurd. Camus proposes an ethic of lucid revolt. We can't change the fact that the universe is silent, but we can decide how to respond to that silence. And one of the most human and bold ways to respond is to love. Because love, even without guarantees, even without eternity, connects us to the present. It connects us to the other. It pulls us out of ourselves and leads us to care, to act, to be close. And this movement is what Camus sees as a form of meaning, not an absolute meaning, but a lived meaning, built here and now. Unlike many thinkers who search for transcendent truths, Camus looks to the ground, to the earth, to the bodies that touch, the eyes that meet, the bonds that form despite the fragility of life. And he tells us, this is enough. This is real. This is worthy. For Camus, love doesn't need to promise forever. It needs to be whole while it happens. It needs to be true while it exists. Even knowing that everything passes, still love. This awareness of finitude doesn't weaken love. It strengthens it. It calls us to presence, to the urgency of the moment. Because if everything can end, every moment matters. Every gesture of affection, of care, of giving. Loving, then, is a kind of courage. It's living intensely in a world where nothing is guaranteed. It's creating a meaning that the universe doesn't give us, but that we can offer each other. Camus isn't interested in comforting us. He wants to awaken us. He wants us to look at life with our eyes wide open and still say yes. Yes, even to the absurd. Yes, even to uncertainty. Yes, even without knowing if there's any answer. And it's in this yes that love is inscribed. Because loving someone is committing without knowing what will come. It's caring without the certainty of eternal reciprocity. It's being present without the promise of a happy ending. And still loving. This isn't naivety, it's maturity. It's knowing that love isn't a denial of the tragic, but a way of inhabiting it with dignity. Camus believed that humans are stronger than they think, that even in the face of death, loss, and the absence of cosmic meaning, we can still create beauty. And this beauty, often, arises in the small acts of love, in a sincere conversation, in a silent hug, in constant presence. Simple things, but deep down, they are everything. Loving, then, is a form of revolt, a soft but powerful revolt. Not a destructive revolt, but one that affirms, the world may not have meaning in itself, but here, now, I choose to make meaning with you. This loving revolt is what humanizes us. It prevents us from falling into cynicism, apathy, and coldness. It rescues us from the logic of nothing is worth it, and shows us that, precisely because nothing is guaranteed, every choice has immense weight. Loving, in this world, is both a poetic and political act. Poetic, because it elevates the everyday experience to the level of the art of living. Political, because it challenges the logic of individualism, utility, and haste. Loving is slowing down. It's being with. It's resisting the absurd not with answers, but with bonds. That's why Camus writes, with such beauty and conviction, that the true generosity toward the future is giving everything to the present. And love is that, giving yourself to the present, completely, even knowing there are no guarantees. Love to him doesn't need to conquer the absurd, it just needs to dance with it. And in this dance, we are reminded that we are not alone, that, despite the lack of definitive answers, we can share the path. We can find meaning not in the sky, but in the encounter. And that changes everything. Because in the end, love is not the answer to the absurd. It is the act of continuing to ask, together. It's the act of walking without a map, but with company. It's the act of, even without knowing why, still caring. And perhaps there is nothing more beautiful or more human than this. In authentic love, we involve ourselves in the other's being with solicitude, within temporality. When Martin Heidegger says, love is care, he's not talking about care as a simple act of kindness or a moral obligation. He's referring to something much deeper, a way of being. For Heidegger, care, Sorge, is the fundamental structure of human existence. In love, this care manifests as a radical involvement with the other's being. Loving, in this sense, is not just being beside the other, but being with them. As he said, we are beings with, Mitsein. We don't exist in isolation, but always in relation. And authentic love is born precisely from this deep and involved coexistence, where the other is not an object among objects, but someone with whom we share the world and time. However, this care is not superficial. It's not the care that just helps, solves, or protects. It's a care that implies existential responsibility. It's a silent and constant gesture of presence, of listening, of involvement with what the other is, and with what the other is still becoming. For Heidegger, the human being is a being thrown into time. We live projecting possibilities, carrying a past, and walking towards a future that is never guaranteed. We are beings in constant becoming, and loving someone within this condition means caring for the other within this temporality, not just loving what they are now, but also all that they've been, and above all, that which they still don't know they can be. In this sense, love is being attentive to the other's time. It's understanding that they too live their own fears, their own anxieties, their own projects, and in loving them, we shouldn't force them to fit our molds, but accompany them in their process of becoming. This care is different from control. It's not invading the other's space, but preserving it. It's not shaping them to our desire, but offering presence so that they can bloom according to their own truth. Heidegger calls this authentic solicitude, Fürsorge, a form of being with the other that doesn't replace them or nullify them, but helps them become freer. And this is perhaps the most profound gesture of love, caring without dominating, supporting without imprisoning, being present without suffocating. But this kind of love requires listening to what the other is, and also to what they can't express, because often loving is embracing silences, noticing small gestures, respecting moments of withdrawal. It's being there even when there are no words, even when there's only vulnerability. Loving, then, is accepting the other in their incompleteness. And more, it's committing to that incompleteness, to that being in process, that becoming that never fully closes, never stabilizes completely. And because of this, the care in love is not something given once and for all. It's a continuous choice, a renewed gesture, a presence that stays. Heidegger also warns us about the tendency to objectify the other, to treat them as a useful thing in our world, as a means to satisfy our needs. In authentic love, This needs to be overcome. The other is not an object of affection, nor an extension of ourselves. They are a being with their own existence, their own openness to the world, and true care recognizes and honors this. Therefore, loving is also accepting distance, accepting that the other is the other, that we will never fully understand them, that we will never possess them, and that's exactly why they are worthy of care. Love, then, is not fusion, it's closeness without invasion, it's intimacy without dissolution, it's sharing the world without erasing differences. This Heideggerian view of love is demanding but deeply liberating. It removes us from the illusion of love as consumption, as the romantic ideal where everything fits perfectly, and invites us to live love as it really is, a meeting between two beings thrown into time who care for each other in their fragility and greatness. In this care, it's not about solving the other, but being with them, not about erasing their pain, but not leaving them alone in it, not about guaranteeing their future, but walking beside them as they build it. And this is how love becomes authentic, not because it eliminates suffering, but because it offers presence, not because it gives answers, but because it offers listening, not because it controls, but because it respects and sustains. Loving, as Heidegger proposes, is therefore living care as a way of being. It's becoming someone who doesn't just say, "I love you," but makes that love visible in the way they walk with the other, in everyday attention, in patience with flaws, in celebrating small victories, in sharing time, pain, and hope. And all of this is only possible because we are, from the start, beings who exist in time. Love, then, is not a fixed idea. It's a temporal gesture. It's something that changes, that matures, that reinvents itself. And care accompanies this movement, renewing itself with it. In the end, love is care. Care with presence, with respect, with listening. Care like someone who says, "I recognize your being, and even without being able to define you, I choose to walk with you." This is the love that stays, not because it lasts forever, but because it becomes true while it lasts. If these reflections are expanding the way you view love, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Being here is a way of continuing to seek wisdom. The face of the other calls us, urging us to an ethic of care. For Emmanuel Levinas, love is not fusion, not desire, and not even a conscious choice at first. It is a calling. It is as if the other, in their naked presence, in their visible vulnerability, silently calls us to respond. And this response, even before the word love, is called responsibility. For Levinas, love does not arise from reciprocity, nor from the need to be reciprocated. It arises from something more radical, from the face of the other, which imposes itself as an ethical appeal, an appeal that takes us out of ourselves, that breaks the natural selfishness of the I and puts us in relation with the infinity of otherness. Have you ever looked deeply into someone's eyes and felt that there was a demand? Not verbal, not aggressive, but deeply human. This is what Levinas speaks of. The face of the other is not just a physical appearance. It represents the ethical presence of the other human being, their fragility, their humanity, their irreducible difference. And by encountering this face, we are called to care, to love, not as a feeling, but as an action, as responsible presence, as the recognition that the life of the other concerns me. In Levinas' philosophy, love is not a search for completeness, as in Plato, nor is it passion or projection, as in Jung or Sartre. It is above all an ethical event. It is the moment when we cease to be the center of the world and begin to see the other not as a mirror, not as an object of desire, but as a being who forces us to respond. This responsibility is not optional. It is prior to choice. It does not depend on contracts, promises, or reciprocity. It simply happens. Because to be human, for Levinas, is to be exposed to the other. And this exposure commits us, calls us, transforms us. That is why he says, love is the origin of responsibility, not in the sense that we love first and then care, but in the sense that love reveals itself precisely in care, in taking the other as an inalienable ethical commitment. This love is asymmetrical. It does not demand a balance of power. It does not expect a return. It is a gift, not in the sense of self-annihilation, but in the sense of recognizing the vulnerability of the other as more urgent than the interests of the ego. It is a love that begins with, "You come before me. Your suffering, your pain, your presence precede my will. I am responsible for you, not because I chose, but because I cannot deny this relationship." This idea profoundly transforms the way we understand love in everyday life. In a world where love often means what the other does for me, Levinas invites us to ask, what am I doing for the other? Not out of moral obligation, but because loving is responding to the existence of the other with presence, with listening, with care, and this care for him is always ethical. It is not paternalism, not condescension. It is seeing the other as infinite, as someone who can never be reduced to a role, a function, an image. The face of the other, in this view, is what interrupts our narcissism. It prevents us from staying closed in our bubbles. It tears the illusion that we are self-sufficient. And it shows us that true humanity begins when we recognize that we are not alone, and that we should not be. For Levinas, loving is opening space for the other to be other, and still remain. It is love without possession, without control, without symmetry. A love that does not demand, but gives everything, because it recognizes that the other is prior to my freedom. This conception has a transformative power. It breaks with lover's condition, lover's contract, lover's transaction. It invites us to live love as unconditional care, as an ethical gesture that does not ask, is it worth it, but simply responds with presence. But this does not mean accepting anything. Levinas never defends passivity or submission. The responsibility he proposes does not annul the subject, it elevates them, because by becoming responsible for the other, I become more human, more conscious, more ethical, more profound. Love, then, is not weakness, it is strength. It is not a passing emotion, it is the structure of the relationship. It is not dependence, it is the decision to be with the other as they are, and not as I would like them to be. This love can be silent. It may not have grand declarations, but it is revealed in the gestures, in listening attentively, in welcoming without judgment, in protecting without invading, in being together even when there are no answers. Because in the end, loving is responding to the call of the other who says, even without words, I exist, and this calls you. Levinas reminds us that ethics arise from the face of the other, and love, in this context, is the most human and most radical response we can offer. Not because it solves everything, but because it sustains the bond, even in imperfection, even in silence, even in pain. Loving is then taking the other as responsibility, not to control them, not to save them, but to honor their existence with care, with attention, with presence. And this is perhaps the highest form of love, the love that begins in the face of the other and never leaves us indifferent, different. True love is asymmetric. It is giving without calculation or expectation of reciprocity. For Emmanuel Levinas, truly loving is offering yourself to the other without measure, without calculation, and, above all, without expecting anything in return. This might seem strange, even unfair, in a world that teaches us to weigh everything, to trade everything, to love as much as we are loved. But Levinas invites us to a different kind of love, a love that is not transaction, not a mirror, not exchange, an asymmetric love. What does this mean? It means that authentic love does not require reciprocity to exist. It does not need to be returned rewarded, or recognized. It arises from a deep ethical impulse, from a spontaneous responsibility we have toward the existence of the other. In Levinas's view, the other is not a reflection of my desire. The other is an absolutely different being, different, irreducible, unique. And true love does not try to reduce the other to an image of myself, nor expect them to function according to my rules. True love accepts the other in their radical otherness and still chooses to give. This giving is not just emotional, it is existential. It is being present with the other without expectation, without contract, without the anticipation of return. It is caring because the other matters, because they stand before me with their exposed humanity, with their pain, their presence, their vulnerability. And this is enough for me to take responsibility. Levinas proposes a type of love that breaks with the logic of equivalence. It is not, I give because I get. It is not, I love because I am loved. It is, I give because the other exists, and this calls me to respond. This is an ethical love, not just an emotional one. A love that does not depend on sympathy, affinity, or attraction. It is prior to all of that. It is a response to the face of the other. The face that looks at us, or perhaps does not look at us, but whose presence takes us out of the center and makes us responsible. And this love, precisely because it is asymmetric, is profoundly free, because it is not bound by the fear of rejection, emotional accounting, or the desire to control. It is pure giving, not as blind sacrifice, but as a conscious choice. A choice that says, I care for you, I recognize you, I give myself, not because you asked me, not because you love me, but because you are here, and your existence has value in itself. This idea is radical because it subverts what we normally call love. We are used to loving with conditions, with expectations, with demands, with exchanges. But Levinas's love does not negotiate. It does not ask, what do I gain from this? It asks, what do you need? And how can I be present for that? And even if the other leaves, even if they do not recognize our giving, the love remains true, because it is not based on return, but on ethical presence, on giving without demands, on care that does not depend on applause or reciprocity. Of course, this is not easy. It requires deep decentering. It requires moving away from the ego that wants to be loved, recognized, repaid. It requires letting go of emotional control and loving anyway. And this, for Levinas, is what makes us truly human. Because asymmetric love is the highest expression of our responsibility in a world where the other is never just another, but always someone unique, singular, irreducible. And this protects us from cynicism. It protects us from self-interested love, manipulative love, conditional love. It allows us to love even where the logic of exchange fails, even where love is invisible to others, even where there are no guarantees of return. This love is silent. It is humble, but it is immense. And if you have ever loved someone like this, you know what I mean. Loved someone in pain, someone who could not reciprocate, someone who may not have even noticed everything you gave, and still, you stayed. You cared. You gave. This is the love Levinas recognizes as the truest, not the spectacular, grand, romantic love, but the love that doesn't need to be seen to be real. The love that doesn't demand echo because it is already complete in the act of giving itself. And there is something profoundly liberating in this love. Because when we stop measuring love in terms of return, we can finally love with lightness. Love without fear. Love without tension. Love not to gain something, but because it makes sense. This love is not servitude. It is not submission. On the contrary, it is an expression of ethical strength, of emotional maturity, of inner freedom. Levinas is not saying we should stay in destructive relationships, nor that love is self-annihilation. He is saying that true love does not come from what the other can give me, but from the value the other has simply by existing. This love transforms us because it takes us out of the logic of the self and puts us into the logic of us. It teaches us to see the other not as function, not as reflection, but as a world in itself. And in this encounter, we become greater, more sensitive, more human. Loving without expecting anything in return is then an act of deep maturity and beauty. It is love that doesn't demand, that doesn't weigh, that doesn't require. But that, for that very reason, is more real, more lasting, more true. Love requires knowledge, discipline, practice, and emotional maturity. In a world where love is often treated as a mere coincidence, a destiny, or a stroke of luck, Erich Fromm confronts us with a much more demanding and much more liberating idea. Love is an art, and like any art, it must be learned. This simple, straightforward statement carries a revolution because it takes us out of the passivity of love. It invites us to move from the position of waiting to be loved or waiting to find perfect love, and instead places us in the role of the one who builds, practices, and cultivates love as part of personal growth. For Fromm, the problem is not that people don't love. The problem is that they confuse love with emotion, passion, and attraction, and forget that love is an action, an attitude, a way of being in the world that requires knowledge, effort, discipline, and, above all, maturity. In his work, The Art of Loving, Fromm offers us a path, and this path begins with a troubling question. Is love really something easy? Does it happen naturally, without needing to learn anything? The answer is no. In fact, most people want to be loved, but few want to learn how to love. Because this requires more than just feeling. It requires understanding. It requires inner work. It requires patience. It requires, like any art, constant practice. Fromm reminds us that no one expects to play the piano well just by wanting to. No one becomes an artist just because they feel emotion. It takes dedication, technical knowledge, discipline, repetition, and humility in the face of mistakes. And love is no different. Loving is a human skill that needs to be developed. And this begins with self-knowledge. Because we cannot love the other if we don't know who we are. We cannot care with maturity if we are trapped in childish needs, unrealistic expectations, and unconscious patterns. That's why Fromm insists, love starts with oneself, but it doesn't end there. The first condition for love is overcoming narcissism. It's stepping out of the illusion that the world revolves around us. It's abandoning the idea that the other is here to satisfy us, to complete us, to validate us. Love requires decentralizing the ego, and this is only possible with emotional maturity, because love, first and foremost, is giving, not as blind sacrifice, but as an expression of our fullness. As Fromm says, to give is the highest expression of power. In the act of giving, I experience my strength, my wealth, my power. But to give, one must have. And to have, one must be. Be conscious, be present, be responsible for oneself. This is the foundation of the art of loving. To be whole enough not to demand the other to fill us. To be mature enough not to confuse love with dependence. To be disciplined enough not to abandon the commitment when the first frustrations arise. Because love, like art, requires practice. Practice of listening, dialogue, empathy, respect. Practice of being with the other without wanting to mold them. Practice of sustaining intimacy without suffocating freedom. And all of this goes against the culture of instant gratification. We live in an era where everything is fast, disposable, replaceable. But love, true love, is slow. It is crafted. It is built with time, care, and consistency. Fromm warns us that modern culture has turned love into a product. It has turned people into emotional commodities. And it has taught that love is about finding the right person, rather than becoming the right person. But love is not a magical meeting of two halves. It is the union of two whole beings who choose to commit to mutual growth. And this leads us to another essential point. Love is an act of will. It is not just impulse, nor just feeling. It is decision. Decision to be with, to care, to build something beyond the emotions of the moment. And this requires discipline. The same discipline a musician has with their instrument. The same respect a painter has for their craft. Because love, like art, has its techniques. Fromm talks about 4 central elements we need to develop in order to love. Care. Love is actively caring for the life and well-being of the other. Responsibility. It is responding to the need of the other, voluntarily and attentively. Respect. It is recognizing the other as a free being who has the right to be who they are. Knowledge. It is understanding the soul of the other, going beyond appearances, knowing their pains, joys, and silences. These 4 elements are not born ready. They are learned, developed, and applied every day. For this reason, for Fromm, love is a demanding art, but it is also a liberating art, because it takes us out of the passive role of waiting for love and places us in the active role of choosing to love with awareness. And this changes everything, because when we understand that love is learned, we stop blaming the other for the failures in the relationship. And we begin to ask ourselves, what do I still need to learn? How can I love better? What part of me is still not ready for this encounter? These questions are the beginning of mature love, of love that grows, of love that stays. In the end, Erich Fromm invites us to embrace love as a creative responsibility, not as something that happens to us, but as something we choose to cultivate. Because loving well is not a gift. It's work, inner work, work with the other, constant work. But it's also the most beautiful work. Because like any art, love is not just meant to please, it is meant to transform the world, to transform the other, and above all, to transform ourselves. More than a feeling, love is an active commitment to the growth of the other. How many times have we heard phrases like, love is over, or we can't continue because the feeling changed? Contemporary culture has accustomed us to thinking that love depends on emotions, that love is a state that simply happens and ends when we stop feeling it. But Erich Fromm, with the clarity of a thinker committed to the deepest human experience, tells us something different. Love is a conscious decision. For Fromm, love is not something you passively feel, it is something you actively do. More than a fleeting emotion, love is an act of will, a choice renewed every day. And this choice has one essential goal, the growth of the other. Love is, therefore, an ethical stance toward the other, not just an internal emotion. When Fromm says love is a decision, he invites us to abandon the illusion of spontaneous romantic love and to embrace love as an active, mature, and transformative commitment. This changes everything, because if love is a choice, then it doesn't depend on the emotional state of the moment. It doesn't disappear when we're angry, when the initial passion fades, or when the inevitable conflicts of living together arise. On the contrary, it's in these moments that the decision to love proves itself true. And what decision is that? The decision to be with the other, not to mold them, not to possess them, but to support them in their own process of blossoming. Love, then, is committing to the development of the other as a human being. It's being present so they can become who they truly are, not according to our expectations, but according to their own essence. This requires maturity, because, as Fromm states, most people confuse love with an experience of feeling loved, but real love begins the moment we decide to love, even when it doesn't bring us immediate pleasure, even when it demands effort, patience, listening, renunciation of the ego. This perspective takes love out of the realm of idealization and brings it into the realm of responsibility. Love, in this sense, is like caring for a plant. It requires daily attention, constant adjustments, quiet vigilance, and trust in the process. It's not about demanding flowers all the time. It's about nurturing the roots consistently. And this is where the conscious aspect of love comes in, because this decision doesn't happen automatically. It requires that we pay attention to the other, that we see them in their wholeness, with their lights and shadows, that we recognize their pains, their limits, their dreams, and that we choose, still, to continue caring. Love is therefore a practice that involves knowledge, discipline, and intention. That's why Fromm insists, love must be learned. And part of this learning is understanding that love is an act of freedom. This might sound paradoxical. How can a decision be love if it's rational? But Fromm answers clearly. Love is not just a powerful feeling. It is a decision, a judgment, a promise. And the promise of love isn't that everything will be easy, but that we will be there, even when it's difficult. Not out of obligation, but by choice. Not out of dependence, but from a real commitment to the other's being. This commitment is not a prison. It is an act of inner freedom. Because no one can truly love if they are bound to the need for control, immediate reciprocity, or absolute security. Mature love is free, precisely because it's chosen. And when we choose to love, something inside us also changes. Because it's not just about supporting the growth of the other, but about growing together with them. Love, then, becomes a space for mutual evolution, a fertile ground where two human beings help, challenge, and support each other, not to complete each other, but to expand. Fromm saw love as an antidote to modern isolation. In an era where relationships have become superficial, utilitarian, disposable, he offers us a radically different view. That love is committing to the other's existence with depth. It's being attentive. It's being present. It's deciding every day that love is worth it. And this requires courage. Courage to love even without guarantees. Courage to stay even in the face of our own fears. Courage to become vulnerable and still remain firm in the decision to care. This kind of love is not passionate. It is conscious. It is not blind. It is attentive. It is not impulsive. It is stable. And precisely because of that, it lasts. Because while loves based only on emotion fluctuate with the tides of feeling, the love that comes from a conscious decision remains. It adapts, reinvents, and strengthens over time, not by luck, but because it's cultivated with responsibility. In the end, Erich Fromm offers us a profoundly ethical view of love. He shows us that love is not something that happens to us. It is something we choose to do, and do well, with presence, with maturity, with surrender, with responsibility. And this is perhaps the difference between loving and merely being in love. Passion is passive. Love is active. Passion comes and goes. Love stays because it was chosen. Ultimately, loving is deciding to be with the other, not out of need, not out of lack, not out of idealization, but with ethical presence. It's choosing, day after day, to say, I am here, and I commit to your blossoming, to your being, to your truth. This conscious decision, renewed over time, is what makes love real, deep, human, and eternally possible. In love, the self meets the other without losing itself. Dialectical unity. Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, one of the most complex thinkers of modern philosophy, offers us a surprisingly sensitive view of love. For him, truly loving is not losing oneself in the other, nor remaining isolated in oneself. Authentic love is a point of balance, a reconciliation between the freedom of the self and communion with the other. But what does this mean? It means that in love, the subject finds in the other the possibility of self-realization, not as dependence, but as expansion. For Hegel, love is a dialectical unity. It arises from the tension between two free wills, which meet, recognize each other, and instead of nullifying each other, become more whole precisely in the relationship. This idea breaks with two common extremes. On one hand, the idea of love as total fusion, where the self disappears, loses its individuality, and dissolves into the other as a form of absolute surrender. On the other hand, the modern idea of love as a contract between two completely autonomous subjects who come together but remain closed in themselves. Hegel proposes something deeper. In true love, the I and the you unite, without either losing themselves. It is not annulment, it is reconciliation. It is not loss, it is growth. It is the discovery that I can be more myself when I am with the other. This is the heart of Hegel's dialectic. Two seemingly opposite realities come into relationship, and through that relationship rise to a new level. Love, then, is one of those privileged dialectical moments because it does not deny individuality, but transforms it into the basis of a deeper communion. For Hegel, this reconciliation is possible because, in love, the other is not a threat to my freedom, but a condition for it to be fully realized. This is revolutionary, because we are used to thinking that love implies, in some way, yielding space, yielding autonomy, yielding will. But Hegel shows us that love is the opposite of that. It is finding in the other the space where my freedom becomes alive, concrete, shared. After all, what is freedom if not the possibility of expressing oneself fully in the world? And what is communion if not the creation of a space where that expression is welcomed, recognized, and strengthened? In this sense, Hegelian love is not fragile nor dependent. It is strong and conscious. It is love that knows it doesn't need to choose between itself and the other, because it knows that only in the relationship do both realize themselves more fully. This vision requires deep emotional maturity, because loving in this model is not projecting onto the other what I lack. It is recognizing the other as someone complete, free, different, and still sharing with them a unity that respects the difference. The I does not disappear into the we. On the contrary, the we only exists because there are two subjects who choose to unite without erasing each other. This requires dialogue, listening, respect, flexibility. It also requires a philosophical look at the experience of love, a look that understands that conflicts, tensions, and misunderstandings are part of the dialectic of love. They are not obstacles. They are stages. They are moments of overcoming, of synthesis, of mutual growth. Loving for Hegel is not finding something that's already complete. It is creating something new, something that only exists because two freedoms decided to walk together. And this new thing is a higher form of reality, a common spirit built in the relationship. For this reason, love is not simply a feeling. It is a way of being with the other that transforms the world around. When two people love each other like this, they don't just get closer. They create a new form of existence, an active, conscious communion. And this extends beyond the couple. Because in Hegel's view, love is also the foundation of ethical life, family, and community. It is where the subject learns that their freedom is not realized in isolation, but in connection. That being free is not doing whatever one wants, alone, but acting with the other, in dialogue, in mutual recognition. This idea is profoundly necessary today. In a world that swings between extreme individualism and emotional dependency, Hegel offers us a middle path. Love without losing oneself. Love without domination. Love as a joint creation between freedoms. This does not mean everything will be easy. Hegel knew that the dialectic is always tense. Love requires effort. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to go through moments of conflict without breaking the unity that was built. But at the same time, it is in this effort that love strengthens, because it is not given. It is built. It is a work in progress. It is a synthesis that comes from the clash of differences, and that, for that reason, is so rich, so real, so human. In Hegelian love, we don't love to complete ourselves. We love because, together, we create a reality richer than what isolation would ever allow. And this communion is not opposed to freedom. It is its highest realization. In the end, loving, for Hegel, is the greatest example that human life is not meant for isolation. It is meant for recognition, for meeting, for the mutual creation of meaning. Thus, love is a mirror of freedom, and at the same time, its most intimate home. When we love truly, we discover that the other does not limit what we are. They expand it. That communion does not suffocate, it strengthens. And that paradoxically, it is in the presence of the other that we finally find ourselves. If these reflections have expanded your view of love, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Being here is a way to continue seeking wisdom. Love is shaped by cultural norms and power discourses. When Michel Foucault says, "Romantic love is a historical construction," he is inviting us to question what seems at first glance natural, universal, or eternal. He's saying, the way we love, or rather, how we've been taught to love, is not the result of instinct or human essence, but of discourses, norms, traditions, and powers that have shaped, over time, what we call love. This doesn't mean love is false or illusory. It means it's not neutral. There are forms of love that have been encouraged, others that have been repressed, and others that have been silenced. And romantic love, that idealized, exclusive, eternal, and happily ever after love, is just one among many historical possibilities for experiencing affection. According to Foucault, love does not escape power. It is shaped by it. Because power, in his philosophy, is not just repression, it is also production. It produces identities, desires, knowledge, behaviors. And among the many things power produces is the correct way of loving. Think of the narratives we've heard. Since we were young, true love is between two people. It is exclusive. It is monogamous. It is for a lifetime. It is the peak of personal fulfillment, and everything must be sacrificed for it. This dominant narrative of romantic love is not just a spontaneous expression of the human heart. It is a complex social construct that solidified especially after the 18th century, with the rise of the modern individual, the bourgeois family, and the notions of emotional intimacy tied to Christian morality and Western social order. Foucault teaches us to ask, who benefits from this way of loving? Who defines what is acceptable or not in a relationship? Which voices have been excluded from this narrative? And what forms of love have been classified as wrong, deviant, or pathological? The answer lies in the discourses. For Foucault, discourses are not just words. They are ways of organizing the world. They shape what can be said, what can be lived, what is considered normal. And throughout history, discourses about sexuality, gender, family, and morality have been crucial in defining what true love is. In romantic love, we've been taught to seek an ideal, a person who completes us, who understands us without needing to speak, who is willing to love us forever, who is at once our best friend, lover, accomplice, soulmate. This ideal, so beautiful and powerful, is also a form of control, because it imposes rigid expectations. It makes us judge our romantic experiences based on an unattainable model, and it turns love into a field of guilt, frustration, and demand. How many times have we suffered not because love ended, but because it didn't match what we were told it should be? Foucault invites us to think of love not as essence, but as social practice, not as something we discover in ourselves, but as something we've been taught and that we can question. This doesn't mean denying love. It means liberating it. It means understanding there are other possible ways to love, equally valid, equally human. Love can be collective. It can be fluid. It can be temporary, open, multiple. It can be between people of the same sex, of different identities, with different lifestyles. It can be deep friendship, lasting companionship, or even silent care that goes unnamed. And none of these forms is less true than the dominant romantic model. What Foucault proposes is that we stop treating one form of love as the only possible or desirable way. Love, then, becomes a field of freedom. Freedom to love outside imposed rules, outside pre-written scripts, outside behavior norms that tell us who, how, and for how long we should love. And this, of course, has political consequences, because questioning romantic love is also questioning how power organizes our affections. It is rejecting the idea that love must fit us into fixed roles: provider man, submissive woman, perfect couple, nuclear family, closed and eternal relationship. These forms are not neutral. They support societal, economic, and body control models. Therefore, for Foucault, denaturalizing love is an act of resistance. It is refusing to live under the weight of a model that doesn't always match our real experience. It is allowing ourselves to love in freer, more honest, and more plural ways. And this doesn't mean loving without responsibility. On the contrary, it means loving with more truth, with fewer illusions, with fewer idealizations, with more awareness of what the other really is and what we really are. When we understand that love is a historical construct, we can begin to rebuild it. We can choose new ways to relate, new ways to care, new ways to be with the other that are not based on possession, obligation, or dependence. This is the power of Foucault's thinking. He doesn't give us ready-made answers. He doesn't tell us how to love, but he teaches us to ask, to be skeptical, to liberate love from its invisible walls. And in this process, love stops being an unattainable ideal and becomes a living, human, imperfect practice, but profoundly real. If love is true, it becomes the ethical criterion for all actions. Few phrases in the history of philosophy and Christian spirituality have had such an impact, and at the same time caused so much confusion, as this one by St. Augustine: love and do what you want. At first glance, it seems like an invitation to unrestricted freedom, almost to irresponsibility. If you love, can you do whatever you want? Are there no more rules, limits, or laws? But Augustine, with the depth of someone who understood love as the essence of Christian ethics, was saying something much greater. If love is true, it becomes the very criterion for action. There's no need for an external rule, because the heart is already oriented by what is good. This statement comes from a deep context. Augustine, a 4th century Christian philosopher, saw love as the foundation of all moral and spiritual life. For him, true virtue doesn't arise from blind obedience to law, but from ordered love, a love that seeks the good of the other and communion with God. When he says love, he's not referring to just any love, not selfish love, disordered passion, or possessive desire. He speaks of a love rooted in charity, the love that comes from God, extends to others, recognizes their dignity, and acts for their good. That's why the phrase continues: love and do what you want. If you're silent, do so for love. If you shout, shout for love. If you forgive, forgive for love. If love is deeply rooted in you, nothing but love will be your fruits. Love here isn't an excuse, it's responsibility. Because someone who truly loves doesn't hurt, manipulate, dominate, or betray. Someone who truly loves acts in line, with care, respect, and justice. And this profoundly transforms the idea of morality. Augustine doesn't propose a strict code of conduct. He proposes an inner transformation. A heart oriented by true love doesn't need to be policed from the outside, because it is already guided from within. In this sense, loving is the highest ethical demand. It's not enough to follow rules. Actions must come from an authentic love, one that desires the good of the other as an end, not as a means. And here's the challenge: not all love is true. Sometimes we call something love when it's actually attachment, need, or control. Sometimes we use the word love to justify abuses, dependencies, and illusions. But Augustine is clear: only love that seeks the good of the other, freely, consciously, and with humility, is true love. This love transforms not just what we do, but how we do it. Because even a harsh word, when said out of love, can be just. And even a silent gesture, when moved by love, can be profoundly transformative. Augustine's ethics don't separate action from intention. It's not enough to act correctly. We must love truly. It's love that gives moral value to actions. And this calls us to coherence, because we can do good for pride, vanity, or obligation. But if it's not out of love, it's not truly ethical. This perspective brings us back to personal responsibility. We can't hide behind rules or norms. We must look inside and ask, why am I doing this? Is this born of love or fear, generosity or selfishness? This constant examination of intentions is part of the spiritual and philosophical journey Augustine proposes, a journey that doesn't infantilize us with external commands, but matures us with inner freedom. And here lies the beauty of the phrase, "Do what you want" isn't a free pass for the ego. It's a call to authenticity. If you truly love, then what you want will be in harmony with the good. This freedom is not the absence of limits. It's freedom to act from love, not from fear, social pressure, or the need for approval. Augustine believed that when love is well ordered, it sets us free. Ordered toward what? Toward God, the greater good, truth, and justice. Disordered love enslaves us to the ego, blind passion, vanity. But ordered love makes us free because it guides us from within. This idea resonates with many ethical and spiritual traditions. In Stoic philosophy, for example, action guided by reason and inner virtue is also valued. In Buddhist tradition, there is talk of compassionate action that arises from a heart trained in attention and presence. In all these traditions, the principle is the same. True good comes from a transformed heart. Thus, love and do what you want is not a simplistic phrase. It's a profound call, a call to love with integrity, to live consistently, to make life a reflection of the love we cultivate. This demands constant vigilance, because love is not a static emotion. It's a practice, it's a learning process. It's a choice that needs to be renewed with every action, every word, every silence. And it is in this choice, made in freedom and by love, that we become truly ethical, not out of fear of punishment, but because we become incapable of acting without love. This is Augustine's ideal, a life where love is the foundation of everything, of every gesture, of every decision, of every choice. And when this happens, there is no division between what we want and what we should do, between desire and ethics, between freedom and responsibility, because everything, absolutely everything, aligns with love, and only then can we say, love and do what you want. Romantic love is a necessary deception of nature, motivated by a blind force aiming to perpetuate the species, not happiness. For Arthur Schopenhauer, love, especially romantic love, is not what we think it is. It is not the meeting of souls. It is not the search for mutual well-being. It is not a promise of happiness. On the contrary, he asserts firmly, love is an illusion of the will, a carefully crafted deception by nature to keep us servants of something greater, the perpetuation of the species. This assertion may seem cold, even cruel, but it comes from Schopenhauer's radically pessimistic view of human existence. For him, the world is not governed by reason, moral purpose, or divine plan, but by an irrational, blind, incessant force he calls the will. This will is the core of being. It manifests in everything, in the forces of nature, in animal instincts, in the restlessness of the human mind, and above all, in desire. desire to live, to continue, to reproduce, a desire that is never satisfied, and romantic love with all its promises is a mask that the will wears to keep us attached to the cycle of life. We think we love because we find the right person. But for Schopenhauer, what's behind it is just the biological need to produce healthy offspring. Love, then, is a functional illusion, something that gives us the feeling of freedom, choice, and emotional fulfillment, but is, at its core, just a strategy by nature to serve its purposes. According to him, love attracts us with intensity, passion, irrationality, precisely because it needs to be strong enough to blind us, to convince us to face sacrifices, pains, emotional crises, and even deep disillusionments, all in the name of a union that, often, has nothing to do with happiness, but with reproduction. Schopenhauer even claims that behind the loving impulse, there is not the individual, but the genius of the species. In other words, we don't love to be happy. We love to ensure the continuity of life. The romantic choice, according to him, follows unconscious criteria tied to genetic health, physical, complementarity, and the ability to procreate, even if we're not aware of it. The idea of soulmates would just be a later rationalization of an irrational instinct. And the most tragic part of all of this, after the will has fulfilled its role, that is, after the conquest, mating, and possible reproduction, it simply moves on. And what's left, many times, is disillusionment. The person no longer seems as special. The glow fades. The desire cools down. For Schopenhauer, this pattern is common, and it reveals that love was not made to last, because it was never made to satisfy the individual, but to serve the species. And that's why so many loves end in frustration, because we project onto love an expectation of fulfillment, eternity, and personal salvation. But we forget that it was designed not to save us, but to use us. It's a harsh view, no doubt, but Schopenhauer doesn't offer it for pleasure. He's trying to free us from the illusion, to show us that, as long as we remain servants of the will, we will live trapped in the cycle of desire and disappointment. Love, in this sense, is not a path to fulfillment. It's an instrument of nature to keep us active in the game of life. But does this mean we shouldn't love? That we should avoid love? Schopenhauer doesn't exactly say that. What he proposes is that we see love clearly, that we stop idealizing it, that we recognize its function and its limits. He believes that as long as we're driven only by desire, we will be unhappy. Because desire is insatiable, and love, when it's only desire, never satisfies. The way out, for him, is renunciation, overcoming the will, seeking a state of contemplation, of stillness, where we are no longer prisoners of the loving illusion. This state is close to Eastern wisdom, especially Buddhism, which Schopenhauer admired deeply. For him, the great sages, artists, and mystics are those who, in some way, escaped the trap of the will, who no longer let themselves be carried away by the illusions of the world, including those of romantic love. They love, perhaps, in another way, without attachment, without the desire for possession, without the illusion that the other can save us. This type of love, more compassionate, more serene, less egocentric, is not what the will wants, but it is what deeper consciousness can offer. So what can we take from this view? Maybe the most important lesson is, don't let yourself be blinded by idealized love. Don't expect love to fill all your emptiness. Don't turn the other into an instrument of your happiness. See love clearly. See desire as part of a bigger game, and learn to distinguish between the impulse of the will and the conscious choice to love. Because even though Schopenhauer describes romantic love as an illusion, it doesn't mean that all love is illusion. There may be love that arises not from the desire to possess, but from the freedom to care. A love that doesn't come from the blind will, but from awakened consciousness This love doesn't promise eternal happiness, but it offers something more real: the possibility of being with the other, not as a slave of instinct, but as a lucid human being. And in this lucidity, maybe we can love without illusions, but also without cynicism, recognizing the limits of romantic love, but without denying the beauty that can still exist in the encounter between two conscious beings who choose to love, even knowing that desire by itself is not enough. Love in a world of oppression is a practice of resistance and collective healing. When Bell Hooks says love is a political act, she's saying something much deeper than it might seem at first. She's not just using a metaphor, she's declaring that in a world marked by inequalities, violence, discrimination, and power dynamics, love is a conscious choice for transformation. Love, therefore, is resistance. For Hooks, love is not just a feeling, it's an ethical practice. It's not something that happens to us, like in fairy tales. It's something that is built, chosen, and practiced day by day as a commitment to justice, equality, and human dignity. And this makes love, inevitably, political. Because politics, in its deepest sense, is how we organize our relationships. It's how we distribute power, affection, and recognition. It's the space where we decide who deserves care and who is ignored. And, as Bell Hooks reminds us, we live in a system that doesn't teach us how to love. We live in structures that prioritize profit, individualism, competition, control, not care, listening, empathy, or solidarity. In this reality, love becomes a radical act. Radical because love challenges the dominant logic. It challenges selfishness, consumerism, narcissism. It challenges the idea that the other is a means to our end. It challenges indifference and calls us to emotional responsibility. In her book All About Love, Bell Hooks states clearly, authentic love is an act of will, both an intention and an action. And this means that there's no true love without consciousness, without commitment, without justice. For her, love is not passivity, it's action. And more, it's collective action. Because in a world where many have been wounded by racism, sexism, poverty, homophobia, domestic violence, loving is more than an intimate relationship. It's a practice of social healing, caring for each other with truth, with fairness, with respect, is a direct challenge to the system that tries to divide us. It's saying, I refuse to reproduce hate, abandonment, invisibility. It's declaring, I choose to love as a way of rebuilding what the world tried to break. This is not romanticization, it's revolutionary practice, because Hooks makes it clear, love is only true when it's ethical, when it includes respect, care, responsibility, and commitment to the well-being of the other. And this applies to all forms of love, between partners, parents and children, friends, communities. In this sense, love is not just personal, it's social, cultural, structural, and it calls us to the question, how do our loving relationships reproduce or challenge the oppressions that surround us? For example, a romantic relationship can be deeply unequal. If there's domination, silencing, control, it can reproduce patriarchal patterns, where one cares and the other commands. It can reproduce emotional racism, exclusion of dissident bodies, validation only of heteronormative love. All of this is political. That's why Hooks proposes that loving is also a conscious act of undoing oppressions, of looking at the structures that shape the way we relate, and, if necessary, deconstructing them. Loving, then, is fighting. But not in the sense of fighting, possessiveness, jealousy. It's fighting in the sense of holding the truth of the other with courage. It's saying, I see you, I recognize you, I care for you, even when it requires effort, even when it's easier to follow the script of coldness or control. Hooks says that there's no true social justice without love, because deep down, it's love that moves us to want a better world. It's love that makes us not accept the suffering of others as normal. It's love that makes us capable of caring, not only for our own, but for the collective. And this also means that love cannot be exclusive. Love that's only for our friends, our family, our group. It's selective, not liberating. Political love must be inclusive. It must extend to the community, to the marginalized, to the wounded, to the forgotten. That's why Bell Hooks says that loving is an act of courage. Because truly loving means acting with integrity in a world that often rewards hardness, sarcasm, and selfishness. But she insists, without love, there is no healing, and without healing, there is no future. So, love is not escape, it's confrontation. It's not weakness, it's strength. It's not sentimentalism, it's ethics. Loving in a world of oppression is caring for ourselves and others as if we're all part of the same body. It's breaking the cycle of emotional violence. It's teaching and learning what true care is. Loving is listening to the other with respect. It's embracing the pain. It's dialoguing firmly and gently. It's saying no when necessary, but always with the desire to build, not to destroy. Political love, then, is praxis, thought and action united. It's building spaces of trust. It's creating relationships where no one needs to diminish themselves to be loved, where the presence of the other is not a threat but an expansion. And this starts with the everyday, with how we speak, with how we touch, with how we take emotional responsibility for those beside us. The revolution of love starts in the small choices, and it spreads, because, as Hooks says, loving is the longest path, but it's also the safest. It's the path of life, transformation, and shared humanity. In the end, to say love is a political act is to affirm that it cannot be neutral. It either builds or it reproduces. It either heals or it harms. And we, each one of us, are responsible for deciding what kind of love we will practice. Healthy relationships are born from genuine acceptance of oneself and others. For Carl Rogers, a humanistic psychologist and one of the most significant figures in 20th century psychology, true love doesn't begin with passion, affinity, or expectations. It begins in a deeper and rarer place, authenticity. To love, according to Rogers, is to be who you truly are, in front of the other, and at the same time, it's allowing the other to be who they are, without masks, roles, or fear. This vision of love comes from Rogers' clinical experience with thousands of people who didn't suffer from a lack of love, but from not feeling free to be themselves. They were trapped in patterns, demands, identities imposed from the outside, and because of that, they couldn't fully give themselves to love. Here's the key to his proposal. Love is only possible when there is authenticity. Without that, what exists are relationships based on performance, fear, and manipulation. But what does it mean to be authentic? For Rogers, authenticity isn't saying everything you think or acting without filters. It's something much deeper. It's living in coherence with what you feel, think, and desire. It's abandoning the armor of the ideal self, the one who pretends to be strong, perfect, desirable, and embracing the real self with all of its contradictions. And this process starts within oneself. Before loving the other authentically, you must accept your own truth. Accept your fears, insecurities, desires, and limits. Look at yourself with kindness, honesty, and compassion. Without this self-acceptance, love becomes dependence, because we begin to expect the other to give us what we can't find within. Authenticity, then, is the fertile ground where healthy love can blossom. Rogers proposes 3 essential attitudes for deep human relationships, which are also the foundation of true love. Congruence, being genuine without pretending. Unconditional acceptance, welcoming the other as they are, without trying to mold them. Empathic understanding, making an effort to see the world through the eyes of the other. These attitudes aren't techniques. They are expressions of authenticity. And without them, love becomes a performance, a game of masks, a field of frustrated expectations. In a world where we've been taught to please, to hide our weaknesses, to adapt to be loved, Roger's proposal is revolutionary. Be yourself, and let the other be too. This doesn't mean everything will be perfect. Authenticity can bring conflict. It can bring tension. It can reveal differences that were previously hidden. But it's precisely here that love grows stronger. Because loving someone isn't trying to fit them into a pre-made idea. It's embracing the reality of the other, even the parts we don't fully understand. And of course, this takes courage. Courage to show your own truth. Courage to listen to the truth of the other. Courage to sustain the bond even when it challenges our idealizations. Rogers believed that the greatest transformative force in human relationships is genuine acceptance. When we are accepted as we are, without judgment, without attempts to fix us, without rejection, something inside us opens up. The defense falls, the mask falls, and there, the real encounter happens. This encounter is rare because it requires us to be truly present, without the fear of seeming weak, without needing to prove anything, simply being and allowing the other to be. This authenticity in love doesn't exclude commitment. On the contrary, it strengthens it, because we can only commit genuinely when we're no longer playing a role. When the bond doesn't depend on idealization, but on mutual recognition. Loving authentically means being whole in the relationship. It means not hiding the pain. It means not lying to keep the peace. It means not omitting what we feel out of fear of losing the other. And at the same time, it means offering the other the same space for freedom. It's saying, you can be yourself, and I will remain here. This is the foundation of trust. And without trust, there's no real intimacy. Authenticity also transforms conflicts. In an authentic relationship, conflicts aren't wars. They are bridges. They are opportunities to deepen the bond, to get to know ourselves and the other better, to grow together. But for this to happen, we need to be willing to sustain the truth, not to run from discomfort, not to use silence as punishment, not to use lies as protection. Love, then, requires a constant practice of emotional authenticity, saying what we feel with care, listening to what the other feels with empathy, building a relationship where neither of us needs to hide. This is Carl Rogers' proposal, a love that frees, a love that heals, a love that doesn't demand perfection, but truth. And this truth is not harsh, it's sensitive, it's respectful, it's offered with the sincere desire to connect, not to dominate. Because authentic love is not control, it's encounter. An encounter between two human beings who have the courage to show up as they are. And in showing up, they build together a space of mutual growth. In the end, Rogers teaches us that the deepest love is not the one that dazzles. It's the one that sustains the truth, that sustains the process, that sustains each person's freedom. And this is only possible when love is born not from perfection, but from authenticity. If these reflections are expanding your view on love, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Being here is a way of continuing to seek wisdom. Love is seeing the other in their unique mission, helping them fulfill it. For Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and creator of logotherapy, love is not just a feeling. It's a way of seeing, not seeing with the eyes, but with the spirit. For him, love is recognizing the other as a unique, irreplaceable, unrepeatable being, someone who holds a value no one else can occupy. And more, love is not just recognizing this value, but committing to it. It's supporting the other in their existential journey, in their life mission. Frankl lived this philosophy firsthand. A survivor of Nazi concentration camps, he experienced extreme suffering. And there, in the middle of horror, he discovered that life only makes sense when we can perceive a higher purpose. And that love, more than anything else, helps us find and sustain that meaning. For him, love is saying to the other, with presence, care, and listening, I see you. I see what's unique in you. And I want to be by your side as you achieve what only you can achieve. This is a profound view, very different from love based on superficial attraction, momentary interests, or romantic idealizations. It's love as recognition of the other's uniqueness. Frankl believed that each human being carries within them a unique mission, an inner calling that only they can fulfill. And loving is helping the other answer that call. Not by telling them what to do, but by encouraging them to be who they are. This kind of love doesn't seek to control, shape, or direct the other's life. It seeks to understand and to support. It's made of true listening, of presence that doesn't suffocate, of questions that enlighten, not imposed answers. Love is saying, I love you, not because you complete me, but because I recognize the beauty of who you are, and I rejoice in seeing you bloom. Frankl wrote, love is the only way to reach another human being at the deepest level of their personality. And this happens not by merging, but by perception, by a gaze that goes beyond appearances and meets the essence, and that gaze transforms everything. Because when we are seen this way, as unique, as bearers of a singular value, something inside us strengthens, doubt calms, fear decreases, hope is reborn. This love has immense healing power because it frees us from comparison, external expectations, the pressure to be something we are not. It tells us, you have a path, and that path is worthy, and I'm here by your side, not to tell you how to live, but to walk with you as you discover the meaning of your life. Frankl called this existential respect. It's love that recognizes the other not as an extension of oneself, but as a person with freedom, awareness, and responsibility for their own destiny, and loving. This way requires maturity, because it's easier to love idealizations. It's more comfortable to project onto the other what we desire. But loving truly, as Frankl proposes, is to look with depth, humility, and genuine interest. It's asking, who are you really? What moves you? What did you come here to do in this world? And how can I be by your side without disturbing your mission, but helping it bloom? This love is generous, but it's not passive. It involves commitment, not in the sense of binding, but in being present for the other's growth. And this in itself is a form of deep love, because loving someone in their uniqueness is also an act of faith. Faith in the other's freedom, faith in the other's timing, faith in the possibility that their mission will be revealed, even if it's still covered by pain, doubt, or fear today. Frankl believed the greatest gift we can offer someone is this gaze that sees what is unique and encourages them to live according to it. But this is only possible if we are also committed to our own authenticity, because no one can support the other's growth if they are denying themselves. Loving, in this sense, is a meeting of truths, of two human beings who recognize in each other not just a partner, but a companion on a journey, and who silently commit to helping each other be who they are, without fear, without masks, without disguise. This love doesn't demand perfection. It demands presence. It demands genuine interest. It demands the willingness to sustain the other, not just on the shining days, but also on the silent days, because someone's mission is not always clear. Sometimes it needs to be discovered with time, and love, in these moments, is the safe space where the other can seek, without the fear of being judged. In the end, for Viktor Frankl, love is an act of hope. Hope in the human being. Hope in the unique potential each person carries. Hope that, even in a world marked by suffering, it's still possible to find meaning and help the other find theirs. And this hope is perhaps the deepest form of love that exists. Love does not seek to assimilate the other, but to respect their differences. For the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, love is not about finding in the other an extension of oneself, nor trying to mold them into one's own image, nor filling them with one's desires and expectations. Love, in a mature and ethical way, is recognizing the other in their otherness. That is, it's accepting that the other is a unique, irreplaceable being, different from me, and that this difference does not need to be corrected, assimilated, or denied. This is a powerful lesson because it goes against many ideas that popular culture has taught us about love. We live surrounded by narratives telling us that the ideal love is fusion, completeness, two becoming one. But Ricoeur invites us to think of love not as fusion, but as a relationship between two distinct subjects, each with their own history, values, limits, and yet still able to build something in common. This is the beauty of love as the recognition of otherness. Love is not about erasing differences. It's about learning to live with them. It's learning to listen, to understand, to respect what is not a mirror image, but the other's own truth. At the heart of Ricoeur's philosophy is the concept of recognition. Recognition is not just seeing the other, it's seeing the other as the other and still valuing them. It's a movement that goes beyond tolerance. It's acceptance. It's saying, with words and actions, I see you as different, and still, I love you, not despite your difference, but with it, maybe even because of it. This kind of love is mature because it's not narcissistic. It doesn't seek a copy of itself in the other. It doesn't demand total agreement. It doesn't demand the other to be who I want them to be. What it does require is ethics, the ethics of true encounter, where I remain myself and the other remains the other. But even so, we choose to walk side by side. And this is a profoundly human gesture, because only beings aware of their own incompleteness are capable of loving with respect. Those who can't bear difference, those who demand that the other change to be acceptable, do not love. They only try to control. Love, as the recognition of otherness, rejects control. It opens itself to the mystery of the other, to their subjectivity, to their freedom. Paul Ricoeur shows us that this recognition is only possible when we also know ourselves, because no one can truly recognize the other if they haven't first recognized their own incompleteness. Love, then, is a double movement of humility and openness. Humility to admit that I don't know everything about the other, and that I never will. Openness to let the other be who they are, even when this challenges my expectations. This applies to all forms of love. Loving a partner is recognizing their limits, their own desires, their worldview. Loving a child is not projecting onto them the dreams we haven't fulfilled. Loving a friend is accepting that they may change, evolve, disagree, and still be deserving of affection. This love that respects otherness is the opposite of possessive love, because it doesn't seek to imprison, it seeks to coexist. It doesn't try to transform the other into an idealized self. It seeks to understand the other in their truth. It's the love that knows how to lose control and still chooses to stay. Ricoeur teaches us that recognizing otherness is the foundation of respect. And respect, in turn, is the foundation of love that endures. Because a love without respect may be intense, but it won't be deep. It won't be true. It won't withstand time. When we love recognizing differences, we accept that the other is not here to complete us, but to share the path, the joys and the pains, the convergences and the disagreements, but always in freedom. And this forces us to abandon fantasies of ideal love. It forces us to live love as it is, concrete, real, complex, made of listening, patience, emotional negotiation. Loving someone with otherness is knowing that closeness, does not eliminate boundaries. And that boundaries don't have to be barriers. They can be bridges. Bridges between two worlds that meet not to merge, but to dialogue. Ricoeur believed that true love is always an ethical process, because to love the other as the other is to resist the impulse to reduce difference to the familiar. It's recognizing the other's freedom as something sacred, and for that reason, not trying to domesticate it. This is the maturity that sustains love over time. Because in the beginning, it's easy to be enchanted by what seems like us, but love proves true when difference shows up. And still, we choose to keep loving. This love is not blind. It sees, and sees clearly. But instead of judging or correcting, it understands and embraces. And this is profoundly transformative. Because when we are loved like this, with our difference respected, with our freedom preserved, we feel seen, validated, empowered to be ourselves. And in this space of mutual acceptance, love ceases to be a prison and becomes a home where difference doesn't threaten, it enriches, where disagreement doesn't divide, it teaches, where otherness is not an obstacle, it's beauty. In the end, Paul Ricoeur offers us a love that does not fear the abyss between self and other, but learns to dance along the edges of that abyss. It learns that we don't need to be the same to be together. It learns that love is ultimately saying to the other, I recognize you as the other, and still, I choose to be here. This is the love that matures, that respects, that sustains. This is the love that sees and still remains. The language of love tries to express the indescribable. It's an overflowing language, almost always failing. For Roland Barthes, love is not just about feeling. It is also, and perhaps above all, about speaking. Speaking about love, to love for love. Speaking with words, gestures, silences. Speaking to try to name what escapes, overflows, burns. And here's what he says. Love is a poetic act, but not in the romantic, idealized way we often associate with the word poetry. Love is poetic because, like poetry, it ventures to say what cannot be fully said. It's an attempt, almost always frustrated, to give form to the indescribable. In his work Fragments of a Lover's Discourse, Barthes leads us through this experience of language. He doesn't define love, he fragments it. He shows that love is not a straight line, but a spiral of words that surround us, that we lack, that slip away. The discourse of love, according to him, is like an inner monologue that repeats, unfolds, rushes through itself. The lover speaks, even when in silence. They speak because they can't contain the overflow. After all, love is overflow, of feeling, of desire, of anguish, of hope. And how do we fit overflow into language? That's where poetry comes in. Because only poetry attempts the impossible, to say what has no name. And love is that, an experience that doesn't fit into common words. That's why we use metaphors, hyperbole, images. We say, you are my world. I can't live without you. My heart aches. Expressions that are not literal, but poetic. Because love forces us to create new ways of speaking. Barthes shows that the discourse of love is always on the border between the sublime and the ridiculous. Those who love often talk too much. They insist, repeat, contradict themselves. And it's precisely in this contradiction that love is revealed. Because loving is also living in the imbalance of language. It's not knowing how to say, but still trying. This attempt to name love is, in itself, a poetic gesture. Not because it reaches truth, but because it reveals vulnerability. The attempt itself is love, even when it fails. Perhaps especially when it fails. Barthes invites us to think of love as an unfinished text, as a writing that never reaches a final point. Loving is writing a poem that never ends. It's inhabiting the space between what is said and what is unsaid, between the word that explodes and the silence that suffocates. And that takes courage. Because we live in a culture where everything needs to make sense, where feelings must be clear, gestures must be efficient, and communication must be direct. But love, true love, is ambiguous. It's full of pauses, of subtext, of noise. That's why Barthes shows that the discourse of love is not objective. It is intensity. It is tremor, uncertainty, waiting. It's the word that repeats because it's not enough. It's the "I love you" said 1,000 times, because one is not enough. And still, we know, no word is enough. Love puts us face to face with the impotence of language, but it doesn't make us silent. It makes us create. It makes us try, with all the strength of feeling, to say what we feel, even if we fail. And that attempt is poetry, even if confused, even if imperfect, even if no one understands. Love for Barthes is also loneliness, because the lover speaks and is often not heard, or is not understood, or waits for a response that doesn't come. But still, they keep going. They keep writing, speaking, trying. And in this effort, love becomes language. And language, when born from vulnerability, is always poetic. But Barthes doesn't idealize this. He knows that the discourse of love can be desperate. It can be repetitive, suffocating, obsessive. It can be made of questions that have no answers, of silences that hurt more than words, of expressions that empty out from being used too much. And still, it's all we have. Because even when it fails, the discourse of love is an attempt at presence, an attempt at closeness, an attempt to say to the other, "I am here, I feel, I love you," even without knowing how to explain what that means. And maybe that's what makes love so deeply human. Not the fact that we know how to love perfectly, but the fact that we insist on loving even when we don't know how, even stumbling over words, even getting tangled up in emotions, even missing the tone. Love as a poetic act doesn't need to be understood. It needs to be lived, and poetry, in this context, is not only in the verses, but in the gestures, in the way we look, in the way we listen, in the silences we sustain, in the small creations we make to say to the other, "You matter to me, even if I don't exactly know how to say that." Poetic love is the love that doesn't give up on language, even when it fails. It's the love that expresses itself with everything, with words, with pauses, with touches, with presence. And sometimes, it's also the love that knows how to remain silent, because it understands that there are things only silence can say. In the end, Barthes shows us that to love is also to write with the body, with speech, with absence, and to accept that this text will never be perfect, but it will, perhaps, be the truest thing we can create. Because, as he suggests, the discourse of love is always a fragment, and yet it is in the fragment that love reveals itself completely. Love is a slow process of opening up to the other's reality without illusion or idealization. For Iris Murdoch, a British philosopher and novelist, love is not just about wishing the best for someone, nor simply feeling affection or attraction. Love, in its deepest and truest form, is seeing the other, but not seeing them as we want them to be or as we imagine them, but seeing them as they are, in their imperfection, in their complexity, in their otherness. And that's why she wisely and sensitively says, love requires patience in the face of reality. Because reality, what the other truly is, does not reveal itself immediately. It doesn't impose itself clearly. It needs to be discovered. And that process takes time. It requires listening. It requires humility. It requires, above all, patience. We live in a culture that idealizes instant love, immediate enchantment, the magical recognition between soulmates. But Murdoch warns us, love like that doesn't stand up to reality. It breaks when the enchantment fades, when the other shows something that doesn't fit our fantasy. True love, in contrast, is not enchantment. It is attention. It is the constant work of seeing the other beyond ourselves. It's letting go of projection, idealization, the desire to mold the other into our image. This love is not born ready, it matures. It's an ethical process, almost meditative, of stepping outside ourselves and carefully looking at the world in front of us, especially the world that the other is. Murdoch saw love as an exercise in decentering, as a moral practice that takes us out of the center of the universe and places us in relation to the other in their full reality. And this reality, many times, unsettles us, because the other is not what we imagined. They are contradictory. They are ambiguous. They are changeable. Loving, then, is learning to sustain this reality without running from it. It's embracing difference. It's accepting imperfection. It's respecting the other's time, their shadows, their indecisions, without trying to fix or rush them. And this requires patience. Patience to deal with the days when the other is distant. Patience to accept that love doesn't solve everything. Patience to grow together, not by force, but at the rhythm of life. Murdoch wrote that morality isn't about following rules, but about learning to see. And seeing, in love, is looking without the veil of fantasy. It's recognizing when we are projecting. It's admitting when we are trying to use the other as a mirror, as comfort, as a way to fill our own needs. Mature love begins when these illusions fall away, and the other finally appears in their truth. This moment can be difficult, because sometimes we don't like what we see, or we don't understand, or we don't know how to handle it. But if there's patience, there's space for love to grow. Loving with patience is saying, I'm willing to get to know you, not just the best of you, but the whole. And I'm here, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's difficult, even when it's real. This love is not impressed only by the sparkle of the beginning. It commits to the process, to the presence, to the constant openness to see the other more deeply. And this doesn't mean passivity. On the contrary, it's an active love, a love that observes, listens, reflects, a love that, instead of reacting impulsively, responds with presence. Murdoch believed that love is the highest form of attention, and attention requires effort. It requires stepping out of automatic behavior. It requires seeing the other not as my partner, my half, my ideal, but as a complex, independent, free human being. This recognition of the other as other is the heart of ethical love, and it's also the foundation of relationships that last. Because enchantment fades, but attentive gaze, that can remain. And when it remains, it transforms the bond. Patience in the face of reality is also a form of humility. It's recognizing that we don't know everything about the other, and we never will. But still, we choose to walk alongside them. We choose to love without having all the answers. We choose to trust the process. This patience protects us from the disillusionments that come from idealization. Because we're no longer in love with the image of the other. We're connected to their real presence. And loving someone like this is liberating, because it doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't demand performance. It only requires truth, and the willingness to sustain that truth with care. Patience in the face of reality is not resignation. It's resistance. It's the strength of loving without needing control, of caring without suffocating, of being present without expecting everything to fit perfectly. And ironically, it's this type of love that comes closest to beauty. Not ideal beauty, but living beauty, made of imperfections, of reunions, of mutual growth. Murdoch reminds us that deep down, loving is learning to see. And seeing isn't projecting, it's recognizing. It's standing before the other without trying to change them. It's letting them be and still remaining by their side. This is the love that grows, that matures, that withstands the test of time, because it was built not on illusions, but on patience. patience to see, to listen, to sustain the real. In the end, Murdoch's lesson is clear. Love isn't enchantment, it's attention, it's presence, it's patience. And when we learn to love like this, we stop searching for the ideal and begin to honor what is. In the liquid world, love cannot be possession. It lives in the tension between the desire for security and the need for freedom. We live in liquid times. This is how Zygmunt Bauman described the contemporary world. A world where everything slips through our fingers, where the structures that once provided stability, such as family, religion, work, and lasting relationships, are in constant transformation. In this scenario, love, which has always been a source of meaning for human life, also becomes unstable, more desired than ever, and more feared as well. It is in this context that Bauman warns us, love is a source of meaning, but never control. In other words, love is what gives depth to our existence, what connects us to others, what takes us out of isolation. But it cannot be ownership, prison, or possession. And this is a challenge, because in the liquidity of modern life, humans desire something solid. They desire bonds. They desire belonging. They desire emotional security. But paradoxically, they fear long-term commitment. They fear losing their freedom. They fear being captured by a relationship that demands time, care, and patience. Thus, Bauman reveals the great tension in contemporary love. We want the intensity of connection, but we fear its permanence. We want to give ourselves, but with guarantees. We want to build intimacy, but we want to keep the exit door open. In this game of forces, many relationships become fragile, based not on the slow and deep building of affection, but on the logic of consumption. As long as it feels good, I'll stay. If not, I'll discard and look for something else. But Bauman makes it clear. Love does not survive in the logic of disposal, because love is not utility. It is not a product. It is a bond. And true bonds are only built with time, with dedication, with vulnerability. That's why he insists, love is not control. The desire to control the other, to hold them, to guarantee they will never leave, is the opposite of love. Love is risk. It is being with the other without possessing them. It is offering presence without trapping. It is trusting, even without absolute guarantees. And this requires emotional maturity, because the impulse to control comes from fear. Fear of loss, fear of not being enough, fear of abandonment. But true love does not eliminate fear. It crosses through it. It says, I know the other is free, and still, I choose to love them. This kind of love is powerful because it comes from trust, not control. Bauman invites us to understand that love, in the liquid world, needs to relearn how to be an encounter, not a contract. It needs to relearn how to be a space for mutual creation, and not just immediate satisfaction. Love that seeks control is anxious love. It is a love that watches, that demands, that pressures. It is a love that suffocates because it fears loss. But love that is sustained by respect, freedom, and listening is a love that breathes. It is a love that recognizes the other not as possession, but as chosen presence, and understands that the only way for love to last is to allow it to be free. Bauman also speaks of the fragility of human bonds in modernity. According to him, the fear of deep bonds comes from the fear that, if we get too attached, we will suffer when it ends. For this reason, many people prefer light, non-committed, unlabeled relationships. But Bauman questions, how can we experience the depth of love if we are always ready to run away? Love requires surrender, and surrender is risk of rejection, risk of not being reciprocated, risk of not controlling the other, and still continuing to love. But it is in this risk that love becomes real, because we can only be truly loved when we are free to leave and still choose to stay. Bauman reminds us that love is an ethical act. It is a commitment to the other, not in a legal sense, but in an existential one. It is the act of saying, I am here, I see you, I choose to build something with you, even knowing that everything is impermanent. This choice gives life meaning, not because it brings absolute stability, but because it brings truth. Truth in the bond, truth in the listening, truth in the gesture. Love, then, is not about guaranteeing that the other will never leave us. It's about being present, even without guarantees. It's about caring without expecting rewards. It's about building, even knowing that everything is fragile, and it is precisely this fragility that makes love so precious. Because in the liquid world, where everything passes, where everything changes, where everything can be replaced, love is an act of resistance. It is saying, despite the instability, I choose to stay. Despite the risk, I choose to trust. Despite the fear, I choose to love. But for this love to be healthy, it needs to free itself from the idea of control. Control creates dependence, distrust, surveillance. Real love creates autonomy, trust, dialogue. In the end, Bauman offers us a challenging, yet profoundly human view of love, a love that is construction, not conquest, that is shared freedom, not emotional imprisonment, that is meaning, but never possession. And this is where love becomes lasting, not because it is unchanging, but because it is constantly recreated by two free beings who, every day, choose to love again. As we've seen throughout these reflections, love is not a ready-made formula or a promise of perfection. It is a journey, a learning process, a challenge, and above all, it is depth. Each philosopher, in their own way, showed us that love is an experience that transforms us, humanizes us, and brings us closer to what is most essential in us: the ability to open ourselves to the other with truth. If any of these ideas resonated with you, if they sparked a new thought, or simply made you feel that love deserves to be lived with more awareness, then this journey has already been worthwhile. Now, I invite you to continue reflecting with us. Like this video if it resonated with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear these words. And of course, stay with us on the channel. There's much more philosophical, human, and transformative content coming your way. Thank you so much for being here. See you in the next video, and may you continue to love with presence, courage, and wisdom.